is webinar 3, and we have a special webinar for you today. So before I get into what webinar is, you know we start out on the right footing, calling the presence of God just to guide this webinar. And for that, we have the Jamaica Teaching Council's Yvette Harriet, who is going to offer prayer right now. Over to you, Yvette. Yvette, we're not hearing. Unmute.
Sorry about that. Afternoon. Let us pray. Majestic God, we give you praise. We thank you. We exalt you for your graciousness. And as we thank you for this platform of educators who have been entrusted to teach the nation's children, O God, Lord, we are just few days away from the start of academic year 2022. Yet we have gathered to be educated and to be engaged in this third webinar, Adverse Childhood Experiences and Character Education. You are omnipresent. And so I petition you and humbly ask, oh God, that you grant us stable connections for the duration of the session. I ask Almighty God that the presenters will flow and that the attendees, the participants will indeed be educated and be engaged. And at the end, we will say we had an awesome webinar. As I thank you for the organizers, I leave everything in your hands and salute you for what will be accomplished at the end of this session. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Mrs. Harriet. So, hello again, teachers. We have, as I said, a special webinar lined up for you. And just to let you know that we may be expecting the minister to come and give greetings. And we will also have our character education coordinator, Ms. Simone Foster, who is going to be our first presenter, and she's going to highlight why we need as teachers to know about ACEs. And then we are going to have, the first presenter, Dr. Richard Honigman. And Dr. Honigman, and Simone is going to give you a little bit more about Dr. Honigman. A little bit more on Dr. Sorry, let me mute. And then we have, and there will be a question and answer session with Dr. Honigman. And we have a second presenter, Dr. Herbert Gale. We do have an apology. Our core curriculum, our curriculum unit, our DCEO, will not be joining us. However, we will have Mrs. Kennedy Haynes Davidson, who will talk about our support to you, the Ministry of Education support, and she will be able to give a presentation and do question and answer also. So without further ado, can I welcome Ms. Simone Foster just to give us an overview of why teachers need to know about ACEs. Simone?
Good afternoon, everyone. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Awesome. I'm excited to be able to join this webinar, JTC webinar today, number 3. I guarantee that in the end, you will indeed be impacted and would have learned something new that will positively affect you going forward. We are continuing on a path of transformational leadership. We are building capacity together. This webinar is in partnership with UNICEF, which is responsible for providing humanitarian and developmental aid to children worldwide. The Ministry of Education is appreciative of the yeoman support we have received over the years. Why teachers need to know about ACEs? Many kinds of traumatic experiences that children experience before the age of 18 can have lasting impacts on their mental health, physical health, and well-being are considered adverse childhood experiences, ACEs for short. If you have experienced 3 or more ACEs, you are 5 times more likely to have attendance issues, 6 times more likely to have behavior problems, and 3 times more likely to experience academic failure. What is causing the disruptive behavior in our children? Is it normal? No. ACs can affect the students' learning and behavior in the classroom. It doesn't happen randomly. It takes into account the child's economic status, family history, and the kind of community they grow or reside. Teachers becoming more aware of the possible effects or impact of ACs are more likely to respond to children with greater levels of empathy. Be more alert to a child in need of help and make the necessary referrals. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone. All right. Now, teachers, you know why it's critical that we learn some more about the adverse childhood experiences. Okay? So now we're going to introduce our first presenter, because teachers, we have a long webinar, right? And so it's going to be a good 2.5 hours long, and we want to get started right away. So I want to introduce Dr. Richard Honigman from Reach Within, and you can reach him at www.reachwithin.org. Dr. Honigman will talk to you a little more about the work that he's done with ACEs. So Dr. Honigman, welcome to the space and welcome to our Jamaican teachers.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Reach Within is a New York City, Grenada NGO where we work to try to improve outcomes for abused, maltreated children in Grenada and hopefully elsewhere in the Caribbean. We work with UNICEF also, and we also work with the Clinton Global Initiative. So it's an honor and a pleasure to be presenting to you all today. And first thing I would just want to say after Simone's introduction is that adverse childhood experiences don't just stay in the classroom. They affect the outlook of the child throughout its whole life and in the future. So hopefully with this talk and you learn more about adverse childhood experiences, you could see how important early years are in shaping the trajectory of the child, the person, for the community and society as a whole, and to improve outcomes is everybody's responsibility. So I just want to share my screen. And is that visible to everybody? Okay. So
yes,
thank you. When we talk about adverse childhood experiences, there's a great deal of terminology that people use, and they're all relatively interchangeable. So you may see some of the slides, which I'll distribute. I'll send them along, and then they'll get distributed to you afterwards. People use the term developmental trauma disorder, allostatic load, complex trauma, chronic stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, toxic stress, ACEs, child traumatic stress, complex PTSD, and we're all basically talking about the same thing. But, the terminology is relatively interchangeable. So some of the slides, say one thing, some say the other. It's all talking about the same topic. The ACEs study was started in Kaiser Permanente, which is a prepaid health plan in the US in the San Diego area, where Dr. Folletti was doing research on obesity. And he found that a number of his patients who couldn't sustain a weight loss because it changed their sense of safety psychologically, started realizing that a lot of his patients had traumatic abusive histories. And he hooked up with somebody from the CDC who was looking at depression later in life related to early life experiences. And they combined their inputs and developed what's called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. And this was done from 1995 to 1997, where they had over 17,000 patients who were answering questionnaires. And the reason that this could take place was because Kaiser Permanente is a prepaid health plan where people had to go to get their checkups. So it was an extremely large study, and the results were rather shocking. They developed 10 questions to ask retrospectively the early life experience that these patients could recall. And it fell into 3 different categories of abuse, emotional, physical, sexual, neglect, emotional, physical, or household dysfunction. And they asked either yes or no. Any yes was scored a point. It didn't ask how many times, it didn't ask the age, but it just asked yes or no. And the total of the 10 questions was their ACE score. And they registered 17,337 patients, of which it was relatively evenly distributed between male and female. The ethnicity was predominantly white Caucasian. The age, because it was adults, was more 40 over 49 and above. And the vast majority completed high school and some college and some higher degree. And much to their surprise, they found that about 2/3 of their respondents had one or more ACEs that they could recall. And you could see here, and again, you'll have the slides afterwards so you could study them on your own, but I just want to go over all this because there's a lot to cover. In terms of abuse, household challenges, or household dysfunction, or neglect. So there was emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, witnessing domestic violence, household substance abuse, alcohol or other substances, anyone in the family that had a mental illness, if there was parental separation or divorce, or if any of the family members were ever incarcerated. And then emotional neglect or physical neglect in terms of clothing, food, other necessities. And this is just what we were talking about. And they found that the cutoff was greater than 4 or more adverse experiences. The rate of increase of certain illnesses or dysfunction or incapacities increased almost on a linear, if not to exponential curve. This is obesity, IV drug use, and this is later on in life because this was a retrospective study. Alcoholism, later being raped, being a victim of domestic violence, and you could see the disproportionate between genders, and the risk of perpetuating domestic violence. You know, we do what we see and learn. And chronic medical illnesses, the greater the number of ACEs, heart disease, stroke, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, type 2 diabetes, sexually transmitted diseases, mental health issues, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, substance abuse disorders, impulse control disorders. The rate in the US, at least, of antidepressant prescriptions 50 years after the childhood events, smoking, depression, suicidality. It's said that the only thing that ACEs didn't increase was your livelihood. That people with greater than 4 ACEs had a markedly increased rate of suicidality and shortened lifespan. In terms of early intercourse, teen pregnancy, teen paternity, number of sexual partners, impaired working performance in terms of absenteeism, financial issues, job problems, and this just goes on and on. And also, ACEs did not occur, one ACE did not occur in a vacuum. They were, if you had one, you were more likely to have 2 or 3, and they worked synergistically. So in women, if they were victims as a child of sexual abuse and witnessed domestic violence, there was a greater likelihood of adult psychopathology that increased beyond just adding these 2 factors together. And you could see also with substance abuse and mental illness of the parents, there was a greater likelihood of the child growing up to have adult psychopathology. So the CDC, this study with the CDC showed that ACEs increased the risk of certain medical illnesses, and they had a strong influence on adult health, reproductive health, sexual behaviors, mental health. And this is just a partial list of ACE attributable problems. So if we think about what is going wrong in worldwide society, you know, we could pick on the US, we could talk about Jamaica, I know what happens in Grenada. A lot of these problems relate back to early life. And we are just on the cusp of starting to really recognize and appreciate the importance of early years. And you could see the association with ACEs and not finishing high school, unemployment, poverty. And here is a graph of 4 adverse childhood experiences versus no adverse childhood experience, how much the increase in certain life factors increases. And it's dramatic. And just to show that it's not in the US, this is a study in Wales over in the UK. So 4 ACEs and no ACEs, you could see 20 times more likely to be incarcerated, substance, violence. So ACEs and social dysfunction kind of go hand in hand. And there's an intergenerational effect on offspring where the children can be exposed more to substances. Substances may impair parenting or a harsh parental style, dysfunctional parent-child interaction. If you are unfortunately a child born into a family where there's mental illness based upon the parent's early life experience, you're gonna be impaired, possibly impaired because of the parent's dysfunctional parenting style. And maternal maltreatment as a child is associated with emotional problems in their children. So the ACE study models show that adverse childhood experience can disrupt neurodevelopment. Then you get social, emotional, and cognitive impairments. Then they can adapt high-risk health behaviors. And later on in life, you start getting certain chronic medical, social, mental health disability problems, and that can lead to an early death. So the adversity from birth to childhood, there's a greater likelihood of fetal death, of developmental delay, of social, emotional, behavioral problems. And as teachers, you're more likely to see cognitive impairment and what we call ADHD, but it may not be the typical ADHD. it may be more related to the early life experiences. And then as teens, because I imagine I'm getting the whole range of school age teachers here from kindergarten through high school, you're going to see children with mental health issues, substance issues, poor academic achievement, and involvement with juvenile justice or incarceration. So the lifespan impacts are based upon, there are certain critical and sensitive developmental periods where the children don't get the proper input. Then you have the adverse childhood experiences that they experience either directly or watching it in the household, and the genetic changes intergenerationally, and that affects brain development, and it affects the hard wiring of the child, and you get these outcomes like in the other slide. And you could see that there are sensitive periods where the brain development is most critical, and this is in the early years. And when they get to school, when they're 5, 6, 7 and above, if they don't have the proper developmental input in these years, it's going to affect their ability to learn, speak, emotional, develop self-regulatory capacities, which you need in school and elsewhere. And it becomes problematic. And also these children, in addition to not getting the proper sensitive period input, they learn to be hypersensitive and hyperreactive and not be able to filter out the ordinary distractions that we might hear in school, of a door slamming, of people talking, and it might what's called trigger them. So the adverse childhood experience impacts the child development, and because the child's development is on a different trajectory than someone who has not experienced as many adversities, because we all experience some, it goes on to long-term consequences. Realizing that the ACEs study, as I showed, was mainly done on a white, upper middle class, well-educated population, it could be called relatively biased in that sense, in that it didn't take into account other what's called social determinants of health that might make illness or outcomes not even as good as in that study. So several years ago, they started developing what's called the pair of ACEs, where the classic adverse childhood experiences were tied to adverse community environments, where it took into account poverty, discrimination, community disruption, violence, poor housing, lack of opportunity, economic or social capital. And studies have shown that these outcomes were not as good as the outcomes in the original adverse childhood experiences. So this is 2 ACEs, adverse childhood experiences and adverse community environments or adverse community experiences. And then more recently, they've developed 3 realms of ACEs, where you have the classic adverse childhood experiences, which is number 1, the household. Number 2, the adverse community experiences. And especially for you down in the Caribbean, where I live in New York, we don't have as many climactic experiences of adversity. You have hurricanes. I'm not sure if you have earthquakes. Some islands in the Caribbean have volcanic eruptions, which is another climatic change. We have pandemic. You've had, COVID, which also has an effect. So more recently, they've developed 3. the adverse childhood, the adverse community, and the adverse climate, and they work synergistically, where if you start off in your biologic household with a lot of adversity, you're more sensitive to community adversity and consequently also more to changes in climate. So this is the model that I showed you before, and also taking into effect generational, intergenerational transmission, and also historical trauma, where you can have parents that might be victims of what's called post-traumatic slave syndrome. And that affects parenting style and also the approach to history and the children. And so we see that development is always an ongoing dynamic, and the dynamic is always developing. And a child's development results from an ongoing process again and again and again between nurture, how the child is nurtured in its experience, and its genetic nature. So one feeds into another, and changes make changes, good or bad. This is kind of, the process is neutral in one sense. It's what goes into it is what comes out of it. And it's also a combination between our biology, psychology, and socialness. And one blends into the other, where it's hard to say where one stops and the other begins, of the structure, the function, and the experience that we go through. So experiences grows the brain and helps change our genetic potential. So the brain of the child develops from the bottom, more primitive structures that control, like breathing, heart rate, sensory inputs, to the more complex. Obviously, a newborn doesn't have the thinking capacity of a child in kindergarten, then middle school, and then high school. And how the upper parts develop are related to the input from the lower parts. And the brain develops by forming connections. Some connections get stronger with continued input, and some get weaker with lack of input. And the interactions and the input are critical and come a lot of times from caregivers. So we see there's certain parts of the brain that develop at certain times in the life of the child, where the first part is more important with regulation, self-regulation, and sensory input, and then emotional states. And then finally, the higher part of the brain, the cortex, is basically the thinking part of the brain. And those develop at different years, and one builds upon the other. And this is just a map or a graph of where certain functions are mainly located in how the brain develops. And the higher functions in blue are related to the input from the next lower section and the next lower section. So if you have a child that's always dysregulated, they're going to be hyperreactive, and it's going to affect how they think. And human development for survival expects early caregiving, where the caregivers, the mothers, the fathers, the aunties, all should provide safety, security, and regulatory capacity into the child. And if this doesn't happen, then the child develops its own means of survival, which may or may not jive with society demands in the short term and the long term. And the characteristics of a good caregiver is they have to be present, attentive, attuned, and responsive. And to do that, just like with a teacher, they need to be present, work in a parallel method to the child, be patient and persistent in providing pattern, predictable, positive doses of safe experiences. So they're relationally safe, they're relevant, they're repetitive, they're rewarding and rhythmic and respectful. And these early experiences can, if you have a good, positive, attentive, attuned, responsive parent, caregiver, and teacher or teacher, it can outweigh all the negative that the child might have experienced. So you get a child that feels safe and regulated and has rewarding experiences. So you get a child that ends up with optimal brain development and can function in a way that society demands and have good character skills. And to show like the second part of the ACEs, where the social environment is conducive to enabling and facilitating the development that it had early on. So you get culturally desired growth. However, if you have a lot of adversity that the child experiences, if you have an angry, absent, unpredictable parent or caregiver, they get to feel unsafe, not regulated. They think of life as unpredictable. And all of these areas are affected adversely. And again, also the community experiences might not be optimal. So you get a child that's vulnerable instead of resilient. And you get culturally disrupted growth. And some of the variables that can affect this is the child's age and developmental stage, like we showed, the child's perception of danger, whether the child was a victim or just saw it, the relation to the perpetrator or the victim, the experiences with trauma, and the presence or availability or lack of thereof of an adult who can help and protect. And so there's a little child inside everything it experiences in life, and all these experiences are filtered through the lower part of the brain before they're able to really think and comprehend. So we have to remember that even though the child or your student may be a certain chronological age, 8, 10, 12, 15, it may be reacting, based on its early experiences and show the emotionality of a 3, 4, 5-year-old. So we, sometimes expect too much, and that affects our influence on the child. And, the social determinants of health show again how the child takes what it receives and brings it into other older environments. So trauma damages the brain's foundation and everything that comes afterwards. And it changes how certain structures develop, certain structures for fear and emotionality are altered. Memory can be altered, and the cortex, the thinking part of the brain, is also altered. And it tilts the seesaw more towards increased emotional learning, where they learn how to react and not respond. Where we think they should respond in a certain way, they react before they can even think about it. And the brain gets wired to fit the life that they experience, thinking that that's what they're going to experience later on in life. So if you have good early caregiving, good environments, you will learn to cooperate, because cooperation improves survival, versus toxic stress or adverse childhood experiences. It's every man for themselves. And there's a lack of cooperation, and they don't think, they just react. They get hot-tempered, which I'm sure you've seen in school, that you ask something and a child, a student can just, jump at you and get argumentative. And also the child carries around with them, based on their past experiences what's called an invisible suitcase. It's how they think about themselves, about adults who they come in contact with, and about the world in general. So if you have a child that has good experiences, their suitcase is filled with lots of positivity. If you have a child that's had a lot of adversity, you have a suitcase that's filled with no one loves me, it's all my fault, you're going to hurt me, I'm bad, I'm stupid, grown-ups lie. And that shapes how they respond to you or react to you, and they get a defensive phenotype, the expression of who they are. And they're used to harsh, unpredictable environments, and their brain and stress response systems are wired after time to be hypervigilant, hyper-aroused, hyper-reactive. Instead of sitting back, everything's fine, nothing's a problem, I know this, I can do this. So this adaptation to their early environment influences adversely their long-term development. So they have difficulties with regulation, impaired cognitive capacity, developmental delays, problems with peers, problems with adults. So, and triggering, making them think of past experiences to how they react. It could be any sensory experience. It could be they're thinking about something, then you call on them in class and it totally throws them off. And they start either arguing or making a joke to try to distract you, or they talk to others, or they just shut down totally. So we have to try to figure out what may be triggering them. Unpredictability, transition, like, all right, class, we're done with this, we're going to this. It's unpredictable. They need more warning. All right, in 10 minutes, we're going to do this. In 5 minutes, we're going to do that. Now we're going to put our stuff away. So if you break it up into smaller packages, it could be easier for them to accept. And if they've had a hard time with parents or other adults, you're an authority figure. So you're automatically not a friend. So you have to work on that. And trauma impacts our survival responses of fight, flight, freeze, and submit or fawn, where it's a survival technique. And the increase in the adrenaline and cortisol shuts down the higher functioning of the brain, because if you're going to be attacked, you're not going to look and see, is the attacker wearing sneakers or shoes or sandals? You just want to get out of there, so you don't think about it. You just run, or you fight, or you play dead. So we want to try to encourage self-regulation. Then you're more able to relate to others. And if you're more able to relate to others, you're able to reason and then reflect upon how you're doing. But a child with ACEs, as opposed to a child who's neurotypical, it takes less to get them into a higher state of fear or terror, and they react totally differently than a neurotypical child, where it takes extreme stress to get them dysregulated. So instead of the regulate, relate, and reason, they dysregulate, they disengage from contact, and their thinking gets distorted. So this is an example of you as a teacher may say to the student, we need to talk, and a regulated, typically developing child may say, I wonder what they want, because all the sensory input and the filters that they've developed of safety, security, relating, says, I wonder what they want, which is what you want them to think. But if you have a history of a child who's had a lot of adversity, and you come up to them in your normal tone with no ill intent, they may react with, they hate me. It's just a matter of time before they ask me to go to the principal, or I get punished, or this or that, and you're totally confused. I didn't say that, but they're not reacting to you. They're not thinking about reacting to you. They're thinking about, oh, this is another adult who's going to hurt me. or I can't trust them. So ACEs and negative well-being in terms of childhood experiences with teens aged 12 through 17, they have high external behavior, which is mean they act out, they're aggressive, they have low engagement with school, household contacted due to problems at school. This is all in the US. Grade repetition, can't stay calm and regulated, doesn't finish tasks, diagnosed with learning disabilities. So you could see that the early environment carries through, and with ACEs, you get a higher degree of academic failure, attendance problems, behavior problems, and also poor health. So students dealing with trauma in the US are 2.5 times more likely to fail a grade. They'll score lower on standardized testing, have more receptive and language problems. They can't relate with their peers. All this must sound familiar. Are suspended or expelled more often, and they go to special ed more often. And starting about 8-9 years ago, we realized more and more that ADHD is not all just what we call typical ADHD, but it's the behavioral representation of children that have had trauma, because there's a big overlap in symptomatology between trauma and ADHD. Some people think it's more closely aligned than this. So as teachers, the implication of having a child with a lot of adversity, it might be advantageous or adaptive in an unpredictable, dangerous environment where you have to be hypervigilant, where you're exposed to a lot of danger. So you have to respond quickly, and you have to have a strong focus on being in the present. But for school and learning, if you're hypervigilant to the environment, you're inattentive to what the teacher's saying because any little noise distracts you, you become impulsive and aggressive because you're trained or realize you need to be quick to respond, and you have difficulty with memory and planning because you're only living in the present. You're not planning for the future. Because if you sit there and plan for the future, the danger is going to envelop you. So what might have been adaptive before is maladaptive now. It doesn't help you. And again, a typically developing child takes a lot to get dysregulated into fight, flight, or freeze, where a child that's had a lot of adversity, it goes up like a rocket. And you get a narrowed window of tolerance where it takes very little to set you off, to fight or flight or freeze. Hyperarousal is fight or flight. Hypoarousal is freeze. And again, some of this is repetitive, but people pick up different things from different examples. That's why I want to include them all for you. And this shows that you want to, in school and at home, increase their window of tolerance as they get exposed to more and more. But with trauma, it narrows. So that also inhibits learning. So instead of normally getting a response, you get something, a sensory input that says, I'm under threat. This is my coach. Instead of this is my coach, he's not an abusive man, you start to think the worst because that's your past. So what can a traumatized youth assume? Safety? No. There's not a consistent adult who will love and care for them. There's no ability to control their outcome. You don't know the motivation of the adult. You don't know that adults may be essentially good, and most of us are, and they don't own parts of their body, and they can't control their own thoughts or actions. So there's none of this, which is what you need for school. And trauma, as I said, impacts our ability to learn. So it may be a problem in the classroom, but we have to realize in order to help the child and get them to learn and grow and develop in a social, cultural way, that it might not be a problem. It might be an adaptation to what they've experienced in the past, and that has to change our outlook towards them. So toxic stress really affects how the child grows and develops. And these are some examples. There's 3 different kinds of stress we've realized. Positive stress, like when you take an exam, you don't need a buffer when you're little. You get through it and you grow, and it increases your resilience and your coping skill. There's tolerable stress, where the adult is needed to help you get through something, like with the baby who goes to the doctor and the doctor gives the immunization. It hurts, so it's stressful, and the parent or the caregiver is there to help soothe the baby, and that helps the baby's stress system increase, then turn off. And then there's toxic stress, where there's no buffer and the stress can be unrelenting, and the child doesn't learn how to turn itself off, and that's what is most harmful. And again, another slide you could look at later. So the effects of stress, which is supposed to be short term, so you can quickly react, respond, and get past it, but long term experiences of stress really adversely affect children and then adults. I'll go through these. It's getting a little bit late. So the trauma responses, I want to get to. The child in school can get to a loop of hyper alert to danger. Even if it's a normal cue for other people or a danger cue, they start to go into fight, flight, or freeze, and they can't take in any more information. And because they can't take in any more information, a teacher may start in, what's the matter with you? Can't you learn? Can't you sit still? So instead of calming the child down, it just aggravates it more and it becomes self-destructive. So this is some examples of what you might see in the classroom: fight, flight, or freeze. And I'm sure this is probably familiar. It's pretty universal. But some children do well with adversity. And it's been found that if a child has at least one stable, supportive, ongoing relationship, it can change the child's life and help form the foundation for resilience. And factors that can increase resilience, which is what we're trying to instill in children, is a competent, caring adult, a good role model, someone who's patient, someone who helps them feel they belong, that they're not excluded. And the power of relationships is very important. It's more important than any prescription medicine, either for a child or an adult. And some other people have been studying either what they call benevolent childhood experiences or positive childhood experiences. And they've been developing a counterpoint to the ACEs questionnaire to see how many positive experiences the child has had, and examine that in light of the ACEs experiences. And they found that the benevolent or positive experiences can really counterbalance the adversity, where if there's a lot of adversity and not a lot of positivity, you get a child that's less resilient, but the positive supports can outweigh the past bad experiences, and you'll wind up with a more healthy child. So we have to remember the seesaw. And so we get to trauma-informed care, where a typical developing child feels they live in a predictable, benevolent world, they're worthwhile, they're optimistic, as opposed to the traumatic developed child who really is not sure of what they're going to experience. So trauma-informed care is an approach that has no downsides, since it can help improve the development of a typical normal child, but it mainly has its effect on children that have experienced adversity, because you recognize the widespread impact of the trauma. you realize that, you recognize the signs and symptoms, you respond to it in a way that tries to regulate the child, not dysregulate them more, and you try to resist re-traumatizing the child in the classroom, because we have to see below the surface of the behavior to what's lurking underneath, which is the child's feelings, thoughts, expectations, and beliefs. And these are some slides that you can look at to help you realize what may be going on beneath the child acting out, throwing things, being disruptive, or putting its head down and not answering questions or running out of the classroom. And you could look at these at your leisure after the talk. I will send these along, the challenges of behavior and what happens in classrooms. So our interpretation matters if you see the duck or you see the rabbit. And how we interpret things guides our behaviors. If you see a defiant child, they may be feeling unsafe, they may want to fight. If you see an uncooperative, resilient, oversensitive child, they may just be in flight mode. So you may react totally differently to that. So we have to go from what's wrong with you, where we cast blame, shame, and punishment, to what happened to you with understanding, healing, and nurturing. And again, this is something you could think about after the talk. Again, about behavior, to realize what's going on beneath the surface and how you can help the student get out of that and achieve. So this is like a pathway that you have to understand. Like I said before, the child may be a teenager but react like an 8-year-old. And is the child reactive or responding? Are they in flight? And how do we address the child's problem? So we have to ask ourselves the right questions. And there's ways to help build trust with the child and the student. And we should try to offer them a base of love and protection, be emotionally available to them, recognize the child's needs as much as we can, provide guidance. And when we protect them, they learn the world is safe and they can trust you. They can learn, if you help them achieve something, that they are capable and not incapable. And they learn that instead of being bad or whatever, that they're lovable and they'll want to succeed. So the things to remember is what happened to you, adaptations to traumatic events, healing happens, and we have a summary, and this is just a graph to explain everything, which you can look at on your own. I understand in your school that you're using PBIS, which is a good trauma-informed intervention, but in younger kids, we really need to try to get more of the social emotional development under control. And also, if we can, I don't know how it works in Jamaica, refer to help in terms of hunger and food, so they come to school with a greater ability to learn. So I guess now I can take some questions if I didn't run over.
Great. The chat has been going, Dr. Honigman, and I see some people saying how informative it has been. And thank you so much for that. We are ready for question and answer. So teachers, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take some hands. So just raise your hands. And they did say, so you might get this question, so prepare for it, that you ran through the slides at the end of it where what the teachers should be doing. They want to know some more on what they can do. All right. And so teachers, just if you raise your hand, I am going to ask you to unmute so that you can talk to Dr. Honigman and you can ask him your questions. All right. So probably you just want to start off with that. What are the the key message to teachers, now that I know of ACEs, now that I know the effects, the impact of ACEs, what do I do?
Well, I think the most important thing is to probably try to take your emotional response out of the picture. To try to recognize that they're not reacting at you or towards you, and not to try to take it personally, but recognize that this may be a reflection of what they've experienced. So you have to try to be a little bit more accepting, not to accept bad behavior, but just say to them, I know you feel this. I understand you're angry. Are you hurt? Are you, wait, let me share this again if I can figure out how to do it. There we go. Are you feeling rejected? Are you overwhelmed? How can I help you? What do you want? Do you need to go outside? I don't know if that's allowed or not. Do you need to go and calm down and then come back when you're ready? Just try to de-escalate the situation instead of escalate the situation. Because if you escalate the situation, and they're going to push back and push back and push back, it's just going to reach a point of no return, because it all follows a predictable pattern. There's somebody who studied this in classrooms named Jeff Colvin, C-O-L-V-I-N. And the desired way is to try to get before it goes exponentially up and you've lost the child's thinking ability. So if you approach the child as, I see you're talking, I see you're yelling, what's bothering you? What happened to make you feel this way? I'm here to help you. You want to be an ally and not an adversary.
Good. Thank you, Dr. Honeyman. We have Marcia. Marcia Henry, I'm going to ask you to unmute and ask your question.
Good afternoon, everyone. Towards the end of the presentation, you were going through the slides very quickly. And I think most of the information towards the end are the things that we need to know. Will we be able to get this presentation? Yes. And I also believe it would be good to pass on this information to the parents so yes, that it can help them at home, because remember, we get the children at a certain age and it starts from there, from earlier years before they come to us.
Yes. Yes. As I said at the start, if you weren't there, I'm going to split the presentation up into 3 different emails. Of course, I can't send it all in one email. It's too large. But then I guess, Ms. Solomon, you'll distribute it to...
Yes. Teachers, remember you have an exit ticket to fill out. When you fill that out, I will capture your email addresses and I will send the email to you. If you do not get email within a week, you email any one of us at the JTC and we will send it to you.
And I couldn't agree with you more that you get the children after a lot of the significant developmental stages have gone on, and it is important. And I don't know what you can do in Jamaica. Of course, I don't know your systems that well, but if there could be some community outreach to teach the parents about ACEs or development or the positive parenting, you know, they may better understand. I know it's a hard burden when you get children that have had a lot of adversity, and it's very difficult. I know in the past, Jamaica used to have the roving caregiver program. I think that ended though. But I mean, that was a good community outreach to try to instill in the children's social emotional development and try to help the parents become better parents. And, you know, if you see, the thing is, if we start intervening earlier, the next generation may not have to spend as much societal money on the ills that we see now, and you could get more of the budgets into helping, you know, develop healthier children from having healthier parents. But it's, I guess that's politics too, but.
Thank you, Dr. Honigman. Marcia, your hand is still up. Just want to know if that's an old hand or if you want to ask another question. Okay. Okay, Marcia. All right. We do have persons joining us on our YouTube page. Ms. Dreidra Bailey, our professional development specialist, is monitoring that page. Dreidra, do we have any questions from the YouTube page?
Not as yet, Mrs. Solomon.
Okay, so YouTubers, if you do have questions, you can put it in the chat. Ms. Bailey is looking for those questions. All right, any other questions? If you just raise your hand so you can talk with Dr. Honigman. We can take one more question. Great. All right, remember, once you log in and sign up with your complete the exit ticket, you will get the presentation. Dr. Honigman, there was a question, I lost it in the chat, and I'm just gonna bring it back up. What about a teacher who has been through ACEs, adverse experiences themselves? How about it manifesting in adults? What is your recommendation?
What you were saying, it wasn't clear.
Right. What about adults? The adults that are presenting, you know, with this issue to deal with children with ACEs.
Okay. That's an issue where the children can re-traumatize or trigger the teacher. And I think if the teacher feels that way, which is reasonable, you know, we all have traumas and we, you know, can sometimes implicitly react. And I think if we realize we're doing that, hopefully there are some counseling services available to the teachers or somebody the teacher can go to seek help themselves. It's not uncommon, and I think that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's sometimes a sign of strength, that we realize that we have deficiencies or problems and we don't want to take it out or feel that way ourselves because it interferes with our relationships with others outside the classroom. And we want to, I think, everywhere in the world want to establish a healthier, better cooperative society. And, you know, there is availability, hopefully, of mental health services, or even, you know, taking mindfulness or exercise, like, you know, mind, body, physical exercises like, you know, yoga, meditation, Tai Chi, or just exercising, and help us improve our self-reflective capacities, so we realize when we are getting dysregulated, that will dysregulate the children, but for our own sake, it's not healthy. It's not healthy always to be extremely reactive.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Honeywell. I want to remind teachers that when it comes on to support for teachers, the webinar we did, in Return to Happiness, it's on our YouTube page. It gives resources for teachers where they can seek help. And so it's always good to take care of yourself, especially if you're going to have to be in that emotional state to deal with the students themselves. So just go back. Yeah, sorry, Dr. Honeywell, go ahead.
I think it's also important to realize that if you're realizing that certain things happened to you, it wasn't your fault, that you didn't do anything to provoke it, and you shouldn't feel ashamed or guilty if you have to open up to somebody about it. You know, it's the same with these students who might have been abused or who might have been, you know, victims of harsh corporal punishment or whatever. It's not their fault. And we have to realize that and treat them as such with kindness, like people, you want people to treat you with kindness and understanding. So realizing it's not anything you did can help you.
Yes, great. Thank you, Dr. Honeyman. We do have two questions. I'm going to take these two. One from Edna Smith. Edna Smith.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Edna.
Yes, I am thinking of this scenario where we have teachers with unresolved adverse childhood experiences now immersed in the classroom with students suffering from the same underlying situation. What scenario might occur? How do we address that? Because here we are, teachers as adults, even regular people in community have had unresolved issues in this arena. How do we deal with that? Case, meeting upon case, how does that go?
Do believe Dr. Honeyman just went through that and taking care of self first. And just like I said, go back to the resources to support teachers on getting that kind of help. All right. So Edna,
Yes.
when you go back to the YouTube page, I'm just going to ask you to just go back to when Dr. Honeyman already covered that area. All right.
Okay. Yes. All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
It
Thank
may
you.
also help if there's
All right. Yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Honeyman.
It may also help if there's a demand from the teachers that perhaps the school system could set aside some time for some group, you know, therapy or group meetings to discuss this, and everybody can benefit from that.
Right. Yeah, and we do teachers, we have group support. We have our Return to Happiness group, teacher group support, that we are having another cohort in January. So we would send out about December, look out, you know, going into January, we are going to have another Return to Happiness support group for teachers from the Jamaica Teaching Council. Yes, it has been really good for our teachers. And we at the JTC are very happy to supply that. All right, Caribbean Scene. Could you just tell us your name, because you're posted there as Caribbean Scene?
Yes, I am Upton Williams, actually. Good afternoon, Mrs. Solomon.
Hi, Upton. Go ahead with your question.
Yes, the question I'd like to ask, in fact, the one Edna asked is one I was about to ask originally, but I have another two, which this is one. It's really a question statement in some form. Tell me something, if a school has a greater number by comparison of students with ACEs, would it be advisable based on your data to deploy more skilled teachers in that area, maybe guidance counselors, to deal with situations like this, if there are some schools with greater record of having more ACEs there?
Well, obviously, yes, and it may be incumbent upon the school directors or how your schools are organized, maybe to have in-service education on trauma-informed care and how to handle students so that everybody becomes more adept at it, because it's going to be something that we all experience. So it's, unfortunately, I guess it is somewhat stratified based upon socioeconomic status, which is not universally, and it's not just socioeconomic status, it occurs in all socioeconomic strata, but in children that have more, community adversities, it probably would behoove the ministry to start educational services for the teachers on trauma-informed care and how to handle children in a productive manner, because you can't train that many specialists, and it shouldn't be the sole responsibility of the teacher who's not trained to do this, but you could probably strike a balance.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Honigman. J. Anderson Leon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I'm just making a statement because the fact of the matter is we will have persons in the profession with those problems. And the fact of the matter is persons may go from one extreme to the next. But as I always say, we need to attack the problem and not the individual with the problem, or the person who is portraying whatever it is that seems negative upon us. And as teachers, sometimes it's hard and it's frustrating, but we need to remember that we need to control our emotions and not allow our emotions to control us so that we can heal and not hurt.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Anderson Leon, thank you so much. All right, teachers, now I have a giveaway. All right, it's been raining and I see someone put in the chat that it's raining so heavy she can barely hear. All right, now is a good time for an umbrella. Who wants an umbrella? All right. So we have a giveaway and we have a question. All right. And so I do hope you were listening. Now, Dr. Honigman spoke of 3 realms of ACEs, 3 realms of ACEs, where ACEs occur, these adverse experiences occur. Can you tell me the 3, no, Dr. Honigman, don't give them the answer. It's a giveaway.
I want to
It's a giveaway. Right? Oh, hold on. All right, somebody was close. Oh, I think I have to go back over, Sophia. All right, I'm gonna go back to my chat. Someone has one, so please. My chat is getting away from me. All right, I've closed the chat because I need to go back now and see who won. All right, and I believe the person who won, and Dr. Honigman can confirm, is Sophia Campbell Jackson, who says household, community, and environment. Yes?
Yes.
Yes, right. Good. Sophia Campbell Jackson, please send me a private message, right? Giving me your contact information, all right? And we will reach out to you. You won yourself an umbrella in the rainy season. Congratulations, Sophia Campbell Jackson. All right, I'll turn on back the chat. Okay, good. So Sophia, remember to send me a private message. Dr. Honigman, on behalf of the Ministry of Education, the Jamaica Teaching Council, the Character Education Committee led by Simone Foster, right? And she has some of our team members here, the teachers across Jamaica. We want to thank you. We look forward to receiving those slides so that I can send out to the teachers. The presentation has been most informative. And you have not only spoken to students, but also to the mental health of teachers, which we certainly do appreciate. We want to also express thank you, gratitude to UNICEF Jamaica, represented by Dr. Rebecca Tortello, who is in this space. Dr. Tortello, just give me an emoticon gesture, right? Yes, thank you, Dr. Tortello, who has partnered with us to bring Dr. Honigman here to talk to you. As you know, UNICEF is very big on creating that caring classroom. And I just want to let out, let's give you a little teaser. UNICEF Jamaica, Jamaica Teaching Council is working on something in developing that caring classroom. Look out for it, it is to come. All right, we are here to support you, teachers. Thank you so much, Dr. Honeygan. We hope you stick around. If you have any parting words for us, please go ahead.
Well, I want to thank you again for asking me. It's been my pleasure. And I promise you, I will get you the slides via email by the end of the day tomorrow. It's getting later for me here. I'm later than you are in Jamaica, and I have another commitment. So I will do it tomorrow by day. And it's been my pleasure, and I hope I helped you, and please feel free to get back in touch with me. Thank you very much, and thanks to UNICEF, and I wish you all luck.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Teachers, how was that? Please send up the applause for Dr. Honeywell. Put your emoticons on. Let's show him our appreciation. Great, good. Thank you. There you go, Dr. Honeywell. Look at that.
Thank you. I'm embarrassed.
Great. Well appreciated. Well appreciated, Dr. Honeyman. All right. Thank you and stay safe.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, teachers. Woo, time is running away from us. Look, we have a second presenter. Do I need to introduce Dr. Herbert Gale to you? Dr. Herbert Gale? I don't think so. We have worked with Dr. Herbert Gale before. Dr. Gale, let me just look for you and make you co-host. All right, Dr. Honeyman, you can stop screen sharing.
I thought I did.
All right.
Oh, okay.
Great, thank you.
I told you I'm a dinosaur.
All right. So Dr. Herbert Gale is no stranger to the Jamaica Teaching Council. He has presented for us before on educating males. He's written a book on males and education in Jamaica. He's an anthropologist lecturer at the University of the West Indies. He is no stranger to us. Hello, Dr. Gale. We look forward to your presentation, right? As you come to talk to us about adverse childhood experiences. Wow, I look forward to hearing, and over to you now, sir.
Hi, everyone. How are you doing?
Great.
All
Everyone
right,
tell, yes.
allow me to share my screen. Okay. All right. I'm hoping you, I caught the end of that, and I'm certain that you are educated as to what's happening in the world of, in the world of research, and that's happening with ACs. And for many persons, you should know by now that that's an area that has had many different names. And as I was saying to a colleague of mine in London, I'm happy that we came up with an acronym that people can remember, because ACs is easier to remember, especially to those of us who grew up playing cards, right? Today, I want us to talk a little bit about character education in Jamaica. And this is a diagnostic study that was done. And what I want to do is to show you what's happening in our education system and the kinds of stuff that are hindering us from going on. And therefore, we want to look a little bit, we want to focus on character education. By a diagnostic study, we mean that we're actually investigating a situation analysis. We're looking at what's happening. And this was done by myself with Julius Gunter and Minka Amenra, my assistant. All right, so let me tell you a little bit of the rationale. Jamaica, like other countries in the Latin America and the Caribbean space, struggles with governance problems, violence, and poor education participation of children of underserved communities, especially males. So as I've said to the Belizean government many moons ago, the problem in the Caribbean is not so much the quality of the education, right? I guarantee you, students who attend one of our top schools in Jamaica can do well anywhere. The problem lies in the matter of participation. How many persons get access to that? So the Ministry of Education was established to transform the country into a developed society. But education is dramatically differentially distributed by gender, socioeconomic status, and geosocial zones, or otherwise known as where you live. So despite the glaring gap in what we call child survivability, right? And that by that we mean specifically the gap between the richest child and the poorest child in Jamaica, and we'll come back to that. And youth life chances, obviously in the structure of education offerings, the quality of education is also problematic. In 2021, a character education task force was created by the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information. The task force was designed to facilitate social changes needed in attitude to make, in Jamaica, to make unity, civility, and production possible over a sustained period. Commendably, the decision was made to design a study to diagnose the systems and practices that exist in schools, as well as assess the valuation of character education by parents, community, and employees. So we looked at parents, we looked at communities, we looked at employees, as well as students. And so all the policies should be guided, all policies should be guided by research. And I'm certain some of you may have heard me say before that too many developing countries are run on gut feelings. And if you have a gut feeling, you should actually go to the toilet. You shouldn't be making a decision about people's lives. And therefore, again, it is commendable, right, that we're actually having a diagnostic study done to see where we're at in terms of character education and ACs. Given the limitations of budgets, governments need research to achieve the maximum results. Because without research, you actually waste resources chasing down the wrong things. Character education includes a wide range of intentional social, intellectual, and psychological exercises that foster positive and wholesale traits in students and others. The ultimate aim of character education is to enable humanity to create equitable structures, institutions, and conditions within which all humans will thrive. If you look at the Jubilee Center for Character and Virtue 2017, it outlines 4 building blocks of character education. It ought to be intellectual, it ought to be moral, it ought to be civic, and it ought to be centered on students performing. However, Dempsey suggested that currently school staff focus on only morals and performance blocks for the purpose of social control. And you look around in your school, you will see that Dempster is actually correct in her study, that we are preoccupied with our children having morals, we are preoccupied with them performing, but we're not necessarily preoccupied with them being civic and civilized or being intelligent. And as I like to joke, quite often when children are born, you look if they have 10 toes and 10 fingers, but you don't necessarily wave your hands in front of their eyes and twiddle your fingers to see if they have actually a developed cognition. No, we don't. We usually focus on control and making sure that the physical are there. There are three broad challenges to character education. The easiest is to solve is a narrow interpretation of the functions of character education. So we have to look at that. The other two are more problematic. These are the immense inequality in education marked by the separation of secondary schools into traditional on one hand and new secondary on the other, and the harsh reality of adverse childhood experiences that you've just been schooled in. Many students' problematic behaviors and learning difficulties are undergirded by their ACs, and the approaches that would help them to improve are not well established in traditional character education pedagogy. So therein lies part of our problem. Hence, character education should be trauma-informed. Trauma-informed care helps the traumatized and the untraumatized. Critically, trauma-informed practices enable seemingly healthy students to identify and assess their latent trauma, and such practices also provide the untraumatized children with insights as to how to live and interact with those of their peers who are struggling with toxic stress. Okay? So you want your students to be able to be working. So while your students, right, some students are having just endorphins, the chemical endorphins, they're having a laugh with so much endorphins, and they're confident and so forth. You also want them to be able to work with the kids whose lives have a little bit more cortisons, or those chemicals that actually stress them to the point of tears, right? Everybody have to learn to live with each other, and education makes us help each other. Schools are the best places to support traumatized children, because in most countries, schools are the one location where we're guaranteed children will be. So let's look at the methodology of this study. And it's important always, yes, to have a working idea of the methods of a study in order for you to appreciate the value of that study. So the study was designed to diagnose existing character education programs in schools and explore opportunities for improving them. The research tool comprises of four different integrated surveys. I know on this side of the Atlantic, we prefer to say mixed surveys. Where I was trained, we say integrated, because we're looking at different principles of how to make different tools come together. A study can be approached from four methodological positions: quantitative, qualitative, PAR, and various combinations of these three we call integrated or mixed methods. Qualitative and quantitative research approaches have various strengths and weaknesses that draw them together, and the integrated survey is used as a combination of all of these as we work together. And this is what your sample looked like. So we had 256 students, and if you notice, anything at all that has to do with Herbert Samuel Gale is going to have some sense of equality. I am very adamant. I didn't say preoccupied. I am adamant that in a developing space, we need to give everybody a fair chance. So we have 127 males, 129 females, and that basically is 50-50. And then for school staff, you will notice that here, we can't have the males here because we don't have them. We have 56 males and 192 females, all right? And therefore, females would make up 77%. And then for parents, we are going to have more parents, more female parents than male parents, because that's what the country is. And therefore, what we have there would be 59% females. And then employers, we had, of course, 56% females, 44% males, because that too represents Jamaica. Jamaica is the only country in the world where 60% of your CEOs and top jobs in the social sector belongs to women. All right, so our sample then looks like our population. Then I want to take you through a few categorical variables very quickly, right? And you're also getting a free lesson in methods. Every research you do, you must have a set of categorical variables, because the world is not stable as people think. We can't hold anything ceteris paribus, right? Because while you're doing something, things are changing. And therefore, we have with us some categorical variables. The first one is class or income. what we call socioeconomic status, SES. And we have upper middle, middle, near poor, and poor. All right? And you should understand those very quickly. Merchants and high income professionals make up the UM group. Middle managers and selected seniors make up the middle. Artisans, teachers, and lower tier security officers make up the core of the near poor. Hush teachers are here where they put you, near poor, right? And unskilled, at least you're not poor because you're skilled. Unskilled and unemployed are treated as poor. We have 6 geosocial zones, right? And these are about the distance from which you are located from a city center. So you have inner city, which is the closest to a city center, working class, urban, suburban, peri-urban, semi-urban, and rural. And let me help you understand what I mean by peri-urban. That's the one that gives the most trouble. Peri-urban, so you know where working class and inner city is, that's fine. Suburban, you know, are the wealthier people in Jamaica that lives away from the city. And peri-urban are the people who live right in the middle between town and country. And they farm, but they go to Kingston or to Montego Bay and so forth. And semi-urban are those towns outside of Kingston, Maypen, right? Kingston, Maypen, and Montego Bay. How you live in a town outside of those 3, you're considered to be semi-urban, all right? And then you know rural, where we farm. Where I'm from, where we call bush, right? The good bush people. Secondary schools are divided into 8 groups, and we divided the secondary schools like this based on our data from, of course, Educate Jamaica and from other sources. So secondary schools are divided into 8 groups: all girl, all boy, co-educational, traditional. Those make up the traditional schools. And then we have technical schools in the new secondary system. And then we have 4 tiers of the new secondary based on their recent history of CXC passes. Tier 1 are those schools that usually have more than 15% of their students passing math, English, and at least 3 other subjects, which would allow a student in Jamaica to matriculate into college. Not necessarily the UII, right, but college. So tier 2 would be 10 to 14.9% of students. Tier 3 would be 5 to 9.9, and tier 4 struggles with less than 5% passes. Now that you've got a working idea of the rationale and the methods and the categorical variables we use, let's look at some of our findings. Somebody's microphone is on. My host, can you work on that for me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. The first thing we had to look at was the socioeconomic situations of students. One of the core reasons that students of tier 4 schools do so badly relate to extreme poverty of their parents. And I want to remind you at this juncture, right, that children cannot be poor. It is something that I've tried. I'm certain I have now worked with over 17 different policymakers from over 17, I think 17 or 18 or somewhere there, different countries, and I've tried to get it into their heads. A few of them are quite thick, but I try to get it in their heads that children cannot be poor. It's their parents, it's their family that is poor. Only 53% of their fathers, when you look at those poor, average 72%, and 70% of their mothers, average 82%, were employed. So that in itself become problematic for the tier 4 schools. So as soon as we start to look at the socioeconomic situation, the tier 4 schools become problematic. Their parents seem to attempt to make up for the fall by engaging in crime. So you're talking about children whose parents, right, a group of their parents are into crime, and therefore you should know by now, if you followed my work, that 25% of all gunmen, when they have children, their children will become gunmen. So if your parents are into clandestine activities, to feed you, you yourself will have that as the cultural reference point. Those of you remember that word, right? Cultural reference point. Children tend to work with their cultural reference point. That is why parents who can't read and write struggle to help their children, because the children have no cultural reference point. This is 17% of all their fathers and 10% of all their mothers. Additionally, they had the highest proportion of missing parents. Can you imagine? You come to school, but 63% of your parents your fathers are missing. 47% of your mothers are missing. And 37% of you have neither mother nor father. But you have to come to school, and people do expect you to do well in school, or not. The most powerful determinant of students' social situation, of course, is economics. And their geosocial zones help to show that poverty is geostructured. Everybody here, all of us know that poverty is geostructured. You can go to a place and know that that place is poor. You can see the poverty from the road. Students from poor backgrounds were almost 7 times more likely than those of upper middle class, what do we mean? Backgrounds, to live in households without biological parents. So 36% of the poor had no parents, and 5% of the had no parents. And they were 3 times more likely than others to have a dead father. Yeah? So poverty and death in Jamaica work hand in hand. And there is your chart. Dead fathers by SES. Look at that. The poor people have a lot of dead fathers. Look at everybody else below the gap analysis frame. What you're looking at, the tangerine line, of course, or red if you prefer, the red line represents the average. Look at the poor. The poor alone takes everybody up to that line because they alone have tons and tons of dead fathers. So we know for sure in Jamaica that poverty kills. Let's go to the emotional side. So we just looked at the economic. Let's look at the emotional support for students. Less than a half, 46% of the students that we studied reported that they had a strong or good emotional support. Slow down. Can you imagine? Less than a half of the students that you have in front of you, depending on which school you have, right, don't have a good or a strong emotional support. And by that we mean having at least, you've learned it because I saw it in the data you just got. Every single child deserves what? In order for a child to be emotionally stable, every child needs at least one stable and consistent parent or ward. Nonetheless, 78% had at least a single family member they could rely on when faced with problems. Females were more likely to have a family member to rely on than their male counterparts, and this gap widens with SES. This is why males were more reliant on friends as primary sources of emotional support than females, ranging from girlfriends to members of criminal gangs. The data show that almost 1 of 10 males had close relations with either a don or a gunman. So let us pause a little bit, because we're beginning to understand this country and why quite often we have to be treated as the wretched of the earth. We're looking here at a situation where we already begin to see that the boys have a poorer, yes, family support system. Violent countries, parents deliberately and unknowingly treat boys differently because they need them to be tough to survive in the tough environment. I hope this is making sense to you. Now, if you understand that, you'll then understand that by not treating them with love and attention, they are then more likely to get into gangs. So the very thing that parents do in order to toughen the boys actually drive them into gangs. And that is why 1 of 10 schoolboys, right? And I've seen other data from my other studies and from other studies, literally you can say 1 of 10 boys that you have in a school is very close to a gunman. Let's look at students' rating of their parents, because when we do research, we want the research to be triangular, meaning that we want to talk to the kids and get their experience about everything, and then we want to look at the parents, then we want to look at the teachers, then we want to look at the business people, right? At this point, we're asking students to rate their parents. 72% of students rated their parents are good or very good. The remaining 28% reported that their parents were mediocre or an embarrassment, a failure, or regret. Can you imagine? Can you imagine as a principal or a vice principal, you write a parent who fits into this 28% category? An embarrassment, mediocre, a failure, or regret. These are not my words. These are the words of the young people. And yes, the children actually said, my parents are mediocre. The case of tier 4 schools, again, these are the schools that less than 5% of them will be ready for college, right? The case of tier 4 schools stands out, with 40% of the students rating their parents' contribution as poor. Can you imagine? 31% of poor students rated their parents' contribution as poor, as well as 33% of those in the inner city. The composite of income and geosocial factors produce some very worrying results, right? As 52% of poor and inner city children rated their parents' contribution as poor, and 35% of all tier 4 students who resided in inner cities declared their parents either unemployed, unskilled, or involved in crime. The situation is yet worsened when gender is added to the cross tabulation. Anytime you put gender in any cross tabulation, it gets really, really sticky. So poor inner city boys gave their parents the worst rating in the study, with 60% of them explicitly describing their parents as either mediocre, poor, abusive, missing, or encouraging them into crime. So you can have a boy and a girl living in the same house, and the boys give their parents worse grades because the parents treat the boys worse because they're trying to toughen them up to survive the violence. I hope this is making sense to you. Let's move now to student well-being, and let's look at school attendance. And you begin to see the challenge that the Ministry of Education has. 81% of students attended school every day, but only 43 for tier 4 students. Now, this 81% is extremely accurate because we've done studies like this before that showed 80%. So 81% and 80% in research are very much the same. Clearly, if you're having 43% of the children of tier 4 schools attending school irregularly, we have a problem. And clearly, that all of this explains why they're not doing well. The factors that cause such a crisis have to be addressed urgently before any transformation program is hatched. It is important to note that school attendance is affected by gender, SES, and geosocial factors. We call these again the categorical variables. While 91% of girls attended school every day, only 72% of boys did. While 98% of students attended school every day, only 62% of the poor did. And while 98% of suburban students attended school every day, only 65% of inner city children did. And when all these factors are combined, a continuum emerges with 99% of suburban females attending every day compared to 33% of inner city poor boys. We're not going to go anywhere unless we begin to address these boys. Let's take health. 2/3 of students reported that they were healthy, and we found that a little bit problematic. 2/3 of the students reported that they were healthy. Mark you, they're not doctors. This is self-reporting, but it's important. But 28% of all poor students either considered suicide at some point or tried to do it. In fact, poor students comprise 77% of all suicidal cases. While no student from all girls schools reported being suicidal, 1/5 of those of tier 4 schools did. 2/3 of the students were food secure, right? However, 7% of students reported that they suffered from persistent hunger. The breakdown of the food unstable respondents is as followed. 84% of all the children who are food insecure are males. I want us to understand what these data are showing. And I want us to understand the implications for the management of your school. But I want you to transcend your mind into my world to understand the dilemma of crime and violence in Jamaica when 84% of your hungry are males, 63% are poor, 58% are from the inner city, 42% are from tier 4, 92% of poor males are hungry. So when you go to a poor home and they have only one dumpling left, the girl gets the dumpling because she can get pregnant. And oh my God, in this country, you know, when you sit down with parents, they tell you, sir, you never grew up with Michael Manley. You don't know about Bev Brown. Me no want my girl breeding her. And therefore, hence the imbalance in Jamaica. And this feeds the gang problem we have, feeds the chaos we have. And therefore, that is why I have been saying to people daily, the issue is not to make life worse for girls. The issue is squarely about making life a little bit better for boys if we're going to reduce the violence in the country, if we're going to be able to have character education, because they have to be in school in order for you to teach them character education. So let's look at ACEs, and this should be very fresh in your minds. 54% of the students in the study reported ACEs. And this is not far, right, from the major study I have done covering 3 countries that show that 45% of Caribbean children suffer from some degree of ACEs. We're just a little bit worse. This is broken down into 13% of students who reported all 4 forms of violence on the WHO typology chart. 13%. Let's work that out for you. This is almost 1 of 8. Have suffered physical, sexual, psychological, and neglect-related violence, or sexual abuse with the other forms, because usually persons who suffer from sexual abuse normally suffer from the others also. 12% who reported all forms of violence except sexual, 15% who reported severe neglect and or physical and psychological violence, and 14% who reported moderate levels of physical or psychological violence. All new secondary school groups had 10% or more students who had experienced the most severe level of ACEs. The tier 4 students with the most vulnerable were the most vulnerable in this group, with almost 30% reporting such experiences, 29.7%. Only about 1/5 of tier 3 and tier 4 students combined were fortunate enough to report that they had never experienced any form of abuse. Tier 4 students differ from all others in that they were the only ones whose modal experience was extreme abuse. So not moderate, not average, not none, extreme abuse. The data seem to suggest that the most urgent need of these students is trauma-informed care. Let me say that again. The data seem to suggest that the most urgent need of these students in tier 4 schools, and to a less extent, tier 3 schools, and of course, the technical schools, trauma-informed care. And this has to precede other interventions. Let's look a little bit at sexual abuse and other extreme forms. 1 in 6 girls, that's 17% in the study, reported being sexually abused. Folks, let's slow this down so you understand the degree of trauma we're talking about. 1 in 6 girls, 17% in the study, reported being sexually abused at some point in her life, and 1 in 10 boys. This was a shocker to my students when they were working with me, because they thought, you know, if you see the advertisements, if you see the promotions, if you see the studies being done, you get the impression that girls and boys are like A to Z in terms of sexual abuse. What happens is that The team of students who collected, my team that collected the data are very good because they got the children to tell them the truth. And still, some of these data are conservative because no one will ever always tell you the full truth of what's happening. Boys were more likely than girls to experience extreme abuse. Income is clearly one of the most important variables that explains ACs, as poor students are more than 4 times more likely to report sexual abuse, as well as all 3 high levels of ACs compared to upper middle class students. The poor are also the only students who had over a fifth, over 20% experiencing the 2 most extreme levels of violence or abuse. When poor inner city males were compared to poor inner city females, the results were extremely Darwinian, showing that in extreme environments, the community protects the reproducer. Who is the reproducer or the replicator? Girls. No poor boy from an inner city community reported human experience, right, of life without ACs. Let me go again. None, let me say this in English. None of the poor inner city boys were without torture. Not even one. We did not find one in the study who had escaped torture. Once their parents were unemployed and they live in an inner city, they were going to get it one way or another, ranging from rape to name it, because some of these parents allowed the boys to go on the street and hustle, and they got raped on the streets. Yet 42% of inner city poor, that's inner city parents who were unemployed, were able to rescue their girls. 42% compared to 0%. Probably the strangest finding is that poor inner city boys formed the only group of males who reported higher proportions of sexual abuse than girls. 33% of the boys who were inner city and poor reported that they were sexually molested or raped, compared to 25% of their female counterparts. This is the 3rd time I am seeing this data for inner city boys compared to inner city girls. I've seen it in Belize and I've seen it in Haiti. We cannot, teachers, we cannot emphasize more that we have to begin to look at what's happening with our boys. It can't be that we only focus on what's happening to girls. So 3 times I've seen this. This is the only group of males I have seen in my entire 29 years of research where the boys are sexually more vulnerable than girls. Inner city boys or girls whose parents are unemployed. Students' self-rating of character and suggestions for improvement. The modal response by students was that they were good people, 48%, even though the mode never went past 50%. But just over 1/5 judged their character as moderately good or poor. The persons who judged themselves the harshest were poor inner city males. The variable with the widest gap was SES, with 90% of the UM students rating themselves are good or very good, compared to 59% of those from poor settings. When the building blocks of character were applied to the responses of students, it was discovered that they fit mainly into performance and moral virtues. This would suggest that students have a very limited working definition of what constitutes a good character, absorbed from the constant demands from parents and teachers to perform and have a sense of morals, not to be independent and to think and to make decisions. But teachers were coming back to this because we have to talk. Ontological security and sense of attachment. 75% of the students studied had either a very good, meaning that they provide evidence with a clear path to success, or good, at least a plan to survive, combined with a plan to access formal training. However, 20% of the students could not articulate well beyond survival, and 5% stated explicitly that they hoped they live to see the next 5 years. This is where one of my researchers actually cried. She couldn't believe that the ontological security for students in Jamaica is only 75%. Ontological security, right? And you can look at the word under Anthony Giddens, those of you who've done social sciences, Anthony Giddens says human beings are preoccupied with tomorrow. All of you here are preoccupied with tomorrow, which means all of us are actually aware of and concerned about our future, our ontological security. Only 75% of our children, despite the fact that the data were cut across all classes, were able to say, yes, that they have a working idea of the future, a sense of sustained continuity of life. And 5% of our students expect to die within the next 5 years. Wow. Throughout the study, poor inner city boys expressed the greatest vulnerability. In fact, even though it's not here, over 15% of them said they expected to die within the next 5 years. And hence it should not be surprising that they are the only group with less than a half of their sample expressing ontological security. So while 75% of students express ontological security, only 47% of the boys from inner city express ontological security. And up to 15% of them said, we don't expect to live. Some of the boys said, we don't expect to even finish school. Everybody in my lane have been shot or have shot somebody. Why would I expect to live? Can you imagine when you have a boy in your class who does not expect to live and you're trying to get him to be stable? And that is why we're saying that we have to address the ACs in our schools in order for us to get to the cognition of these boys and girls so that we can teach them. Throughout the study, boys more than girls struggled to establish bonds with parents, and upon failing to do so, created a greater attachment with friends, many of whom were involved in crime, 10%. Police and teachers, almost a half of the students had either fear or poor relations with the police. Boy, Herbert Samuel Gale. I have tried, and I will continue to try. I will not give up, but I need your support. You live in a country where almost a half of the children, we don't get the boys yet, we're just talking about the children. 46% of children said they had either a fear.
Mrs. Haynes Davidson. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. So we live in a country in which, almost a half of the students said they had either a fear or a poor relationship with the police. And this is why I have to reinforce with the Ministry of National Security. I have to continue fighting, and you have to help me fight for us to begin to address things like constant SOE and ZOSO, because we cannot continue to make our children grow up in an environment where all they see every day is the aggression of the state. This was not the case with teacher-student relationship. Thank God we have teachers. With 86% of students suggesting that they have a good or very good relationship with their teachers, it is fair to say that the school is a very good space to intervene in order to reshape society. So let me just say it. So while the state is tearing down the society, I'll say it again. While the governance in Jamaica, be they labor right or comrade, because there ain't much difference in the last how many years, the school is expected to stabilize this country that is so tumultuous. The data show that teachers have met students' expectations better than any other socializing group, including parents, community, friends, and the police. And that is why when you ask for more money, teachers, I am always supporting you. But I do understand the politics behind it, and I won't get into it. The ministry's challenge seems to be getting children to attend school. If we can only get the children in school, then we can work our magic to keep them safe and to create a society. And that's why I've said it repeatedly, we need the Ministry of Education to have a greater slice of the budget. But let's go. Let me step away from the politics of the country and go. The model attachment experience of students were described as reasonable. Only a fifth of the students felt a strong attachment at all levels. 20% of students expressed a strong attachment at all levels, which is what is needed for young people to become civic-minded. So there's a lot of work we have to do to get people to love this country. 39% of students provided data that allowed us to conclude that they had attachment problems. 2 of 5 children in the study had attachment problems. They reported fear, poor, or no attachment. The breakout data showed that the students were least attached to their communities and least attached to this country, land of food and water that we love. The experience and views of the school staff. So teachers, your time. We just looked at the students, now we're going to look at your business. Almost 3/4 of the staff reported that their school had a conduct or character requirement for graduation. So almost 3/4 of you said that your school had a character requirement for graduation. Me no want graduate, no pitney, we are going to tear up society, one teacher said. While the staff of all boys schools did not emphasize awards for good character, all reported that character was critical to protect the reputation of the school. Okay, only 33% of Tier 3 and 25% of Tier 4 staff reported having a character requirement for graduation. The staff of the most underserved schools suggested that it would be immoral to exclude the students from a school leaving ceremony on the basis of behavior. When Dr. Gale, we got them very bad and made them better. So if we make them better and they still haven't arrived at the point where we want them, why should we stop them from leaving school? They've improved. For leadership, school staff ranked character as the most important requirement, 95%, which is interesting. Above good grades, 81%, and leadership, 49%. Almost 3/4, 72% of staff reported that their schools try to produce socially functional and competent students. Major rule and their associated punishment. Yes, we went there. Yes, teachers, we did go there. 55% of the staff were only concerned about misdemeanors, and we commend those schools. We are happy for you, where 55% of your staff were only concerned about misdemeanor, but 30% were concerned about petty behaviors and moderate rudeness to staff. Nonetheless, 15% of our teachers were concerned about major fights and crime and violence committed by students, including guns and gang issues. Tier 1, co-educational and all-girls schools are the safest secondary school spaces in Jamaica. We all know that. The continuum then drops to the final group where illegal activities, including carrying gun or a shooter or gun bags. For those who don't know what gun bags mean, it means the child, your student, carries weapons for a gunman, not a licensed firearm, right? And they were also concerned about scamming and gang recruitment as part of the school realities. The problem was most evident, of course, in the Tier 4 schools, where 57% of staff listed crime as a problem. Schools crafted a long list of punishment and strategies to curb students' behavior. Most schools, 56%, 59%, relied on a combination of punitive and restorative measures, while over a third, 35%, relied primarily on punitive. I don't know why, in the name of Jesus and even Jesus, why, as people who were punished, who come from slavery, why we love punish people so much. But 35% of our schools say, yo, listen to me, they need to be punished. Ha-hi, they must be punished. We could not find the evidence in these 35% schools where there was any reliance on restorative justice. Only 6% of staff insisted that restorative punishment is the focus of their schools. Now, teachers, we have to talk. Can't be punished. It can't be punitive all the way, man. So we have issues. 6%, we have to grow that 6%. We have to treat it like a seed and make it grow. We have to begin to get restorative punishment into place. If the kids are bad, they need to be restored, not shut down. Students' core needs, comparative data. According to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food should be children's first need. This is to be followed by financial support, which can also buy food, which allows students to access their basic needs. Nonetheless, given our ranking as the fourth most violent country in the world at the time of this writing, the new data says that Jamaica is the most violent country in the world for 2021. It is not surprising that food and money were outranked by safety needs. So even though it is normal for kids to say food, 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 and anything else, still food, the bulk of our children put safety, they want to live before they even eat food. Though if they don't eat food, they will die. This is not a biological or a neurobiological response, folk. This is a limbic response from our children crying out for help. They want to be safe because we are seriously violent. For staff and parents, safety was also elevated above norm, but only children placed it first. It is important to note that the primary concerns, safety and food, dominate the crisis of Tier 4. Inner city, poor students, with safety being primary for girls and food being primary for boys. Note that these boys were the only ones where food was more important than safety, despite the well-documented, precarious nature of their environment in which they are 13 times more likely to be killed than their female counterparts. But the boys told you in the Tier 4 schools, sir, we're hungry. Even if we know, so yes, sir, we know we're far more vulnerable than the girls in terms of safety, but we are dead for hungry. Not funny. Having a good character overperformed for all three groups because the respondents thought it is desperately needed to help in the face of the deprivation and the violence in Jamaica. Interestingly, friends and supervision received mixed views throughout the study. The qualitative material shows that students sometimes associate supervision with punishment. Isn't that sad? Isn't that sad? We gave the students supervision and they said, no, that's punishment. Wow. Friends, though fulfilling a critical need of love and belonging, as you know, the Maslow's hierarchy, were not always discussed as positive in the study because so many of the children live around friends who are involved in crime. So there you go. Let's take our time to look at this. Maslow's is on the left. You have food, financial, safety, pass your exams, supervision, emotional, friends, and character. That's how Maslow puts it. Here comes the students of Jamaica. Let's take character. See, everybody has moved character up. Let's put friends. Everybody move friends down because, well, except the students, because parents and teachers are concerned about bad company. Let me use Jamaican terms. And look at emotion. The staff and the parents move emotions way up because you know these kids are emotionally disturbed. A lot of these kids have mental health issues. All right, let's go on. Value of character education, the application of the 4 blocks, and now we're in the core of it. The data displayed in table 3 and table 4 are contradictory. In table 3, right, and we see those. In table 3, that's coming up, Maslow's hierarchy of needs for students is grouped into 3. Earn a living, right, the middle, safety, and the next one, respect. So those are, so your most basic would be earn a living, from which you get food and these things. And safety are your middle needs. You know that. All of you did that in teachers' colleges and when you did your degree or when you went to UE. And respect is an upper need. They are matched against the 4 character education blocks. The intellectual needs are highlighted in yellow. First, note that in table 3, that students, staff, and parents all agree that moral and performance blocks need at least contacts, which is an intellectual quality. And the other day I was talking to a teacher and she was telling me, boy, Herbs, not until I saw this thing did I realize that I have to teach my students to be more street smart. Your students have to be street smart if they're going to survive in Jamaica. In Jamaica, you can't just learn the 3 R's. You have to learn to make contacts, something we call social capital, but we'll come back to that. Second, all three groups agree that intellectual qualities are needed for children to be safe. You can't be safe if you're not street smart. Nonetheless, they still stressed performance and moral qualities over intelligence. Teachers, we have a lot of work to do. So let's look at it. Table 3. Look at contacts. So the student says contacts are important. Staff says contacts are important, right? The parent says contacts are important. Okay, everybody says that. But then when you ask them, they tell you that the students must have respect, and the students must perform, and the students must have a sense of morals. And then we forget that the students also need to be intelligent. That's what this is saying. And so we know for sure that going forward with character education, we have to help teachers to emphasize more the issue of the children being safe, being street smart. Look at what the children gave street smarts. Very big score, 90%. Okay? Not the teachers and the staff. They gave lower tiers, lower scores. All right. So third, table 4 shows that while students were in agreement with teachers and parents when asked about the value of character education, they adjusted their emphasis when asked what is needed for them to improve their character. They shifted towards the demands of employers. So employers and the students were more aligned, and teachers and parents were more aligned. Quite fascinating, showing an awareness of the weaknesses employers speak about, which we'll come back to. Finally, the data in both tables show that teachers and parents are so preoccupied with social control that they contradicted themselves. On one hand, they acknowledge the value of all 4 blocks. Let's go again. Morals, performance, civic responsibility, and of course, intelligence. On the other, when asked to say which blocks they encouraged or gave awards to, like, you know, when the students, you're going to give awards to the students at the end of graduation or during the term, ta-da! They listed morals first and intelligence last. Come on. This is one of the explanations of employers' claim that the education system in Jamaica does not encourage students to have initiative. Because that's not what we really award. So there are schools and teachers who are actually awarding all 4, but the bulk of teachers are awarding exactly what the society would have awarded: morals and performance. But we need to encourage our students to actually be more intellectual. I have the Matthew here, and when I say to them, students, here's my work, here's a piece of my work, critique it. Sir, how can I critique you? Oh my God. And well, you're not going to pass your exam because you have to critique it. I saw a woman in her 30s cried because she had to critique my work, thinking that I'm going to beat her up, right? And you know, when I got to her, I said to her, I know this is my first research. I know it has 12 errors, and you better find 6 or you fail. And tearfully, she went and found 5. Students' area of need for improvement, they will tell you, sir, I want to improve in my performance. I want to improve in my morals, right? I want to improve in my intellectual and my civic pride. Employees say the same thing. Look at it. Look at the employers. I want the students to improve in performance. I want them to improve in morals, but I want them to improve intellectually. But the parents and the teachers put intellectual dead last. Programs that exist in schools that help to develop a good character in students. There are 2 main points worth noting here when the data for students, staff, and parents are compared. First, with the exception of those of all girls schools, parents were too uninvolved and poorly informed to be able to list programs in schools aimed at improving students' character. Almost 2/3, 64%, could not list a single program. I am amazed at all girls schools. I don't know what the teachers there, how they do it. And I think we need to spend some more time looking at these all-girls schools. There are 15 of them in Jamaica. But the staff there get the parents to be involved. No other school in Jamaica even come close. The second is that while students and staff listed a wide cross-section of programs, clubs, counseling, and seminars were the most impactful. All three of these programs are resource dependent, and therefore it's going to depend on whether or not the school has resources. Resources. Schools with extreme trauma listed counseling as their number one. Yes? Character education, again, will need to be trauma focused. However, this cannot be achieved without having guidance counselors and other resources. And so we have to look at these problematic schools having the resources around them. 45% of staff listed lack of resources as the number one challenge to effecting programs that have the greatest impact. This was, however, differentially distributed by school types, with all boys schools having 0 and all girls schools having 7. These are negligible at the positive end. And tier 4 schools having 69% and tier 3, 53% at the crisis end of this trajectory. The tragedy is that the schools that need the most resources, my God, they have the least. And therefore, we're going to have to get to a place that we're going to talk about later, in which we redistribute resources to schools. There is little consensus among the role models of students. There's little consensus among students, staff, and teachers about who are the role models of students. The data from students show that they model whoever shows them love and care, 36%, over all other potential role models. This category is missing from the data of staff and parents who focus on achievement. Again, they focus on performance. 72% for staff, 45% for parents. It was so paradoxical. When we interviewed teachers are talking about, here are the role models of my students. When we interview the students and ask the students, who's your role model? My teacher. So paradoxical. The teacher doesn't know that she is the role model of the bulk of her students. In a lot of schools, we saw this. But we know teachers, they don't want to blow your horn, right? Toot your own horn, but we tell you for sure, you are critical to your children. The implication is clearest from poor inner city students who rely on dons or criminals for support. For students, the third most important quality of the people they emulate is character. That's important, with special emphasis on resilience. The students are hell-bent on the people who've overcome, including their teachers. While parents had a higher proportion of emphasis on character, morals superseded the performance quality resilience. For staff, character was secondary and implied in achievement. Finally, while students listed their achieved parents as their number one role model, inner city poor students listed humanitarians, including their teachers, as their number one. So you can imagine when you teach in an inner city school, can you imagine you are your students' role model? All right. Summary of role models, you can see them there. The one in blue, achievement, right? So support is the highest for students. Is whoever support them is number one, and achievement is number two. But for staff, it's about achievement. And for parents, achievement and support. Let's go. The value of structuring character education. All four subsamples strongly supported the idea of formalizing character education in schools. Nonetheless, they were not supportive of the idea of employers demanding certification for character education. Interestingly, employers were the least supportive of the idea. Only those in the service industry, the service industry, people like the paper, right? Consider it important, right, to demand certification. Students were the most vocal in supporting the formalization. So the students wanted formalization. They presented 4 reasons why they supported having a certificate, or where I grew up, certificate. Don't know if you know that word. The schools will make an effort to have a more structured character education program if at the end they have to give us a certificate. Students would take character education more seriously. So the students are the ones more than anybody else demanding certification. More students would be exposed to the entire package of character education rather than some if there's certification, because then teachers will have to give us the entire package. And 4, the schools will be forced to value intelligence and provide a space for us to think rather than just follow their orders. Wow, these are students speaking. So let's see if we get to the end of this. Chart 2, views on the formalization. What you notice, should employers demand character certification? Student says, should character education be structured and have exam? You notice the students are high on that. Okay, and these are individual, not percentage. Okay, so here are some suggestions. And I'll give you 8 suggestions and then we open for question. Suggestion 1. The primary suggestion is that there is an obvious need for character education in schools and that it should be formalized or structured with an exit examination that affords all students with the exposure to all blocks. The data tell us that this program will have differential appeals to students, staff, and parents. Nonetheless, no school had a formal program. Even the traditional schools that have the most effective systems complain that they need better structuring. So we ought to have character education with better structuring. 2, please let us expand the definition or change the emphasis of character education in schools and among parents. The existence of character education in schools and the form supported by parents is obviously for the purpose of social control. I understand we are preoccupied with control. In the name of Jesus, we know that we want to have some control of our environment. However, students have directly and indirectly criticized this model. Parents and teachers have directly and indirectly exposed the weaknesses that exist. Any program constructed must focus on genuine character development and have faith that such an approach will produce the stable, productive human beings rather than try to force it onto the students. Currently, civic participation and pride and the intellectual block are the least explored in schools, are supported by parents. And therefore, part of the process of character education must be to look at creative ways to get children to love this country. At the same time, we have to demand greater governance from the labor rights and the comrades who are in politics. The data on student attachment to Jamaica was simply embarrassing. There has to be structured work on helping Jamaican children appreciate their country and themselves. The greatest challenge, and I'm not talking about come World Cup time or come Olympics, I'm talking continuously. The greatest challenge is the intellectual, which encourages democracy and allows children a space to question and exhibit independence. A teacher the other day asked me, she said, Herbs, I heard your presentation. Tell me something I can do to make my children become more resilient and more independent minded. And I said, allow them to set up their class rules. She tried it and she called back and she said, wow, Herbs, these kids are worse than me. They are more stringent than me. I said, yes. She said, Herbs, to be honest, I never had faith that they could come up with 10 rules for the class that they would abide by. And Herbs, they're abiding by it because they're the ones who set it up. And I said, yes, democratic participation is powerful. Those are still considered dangerous or too much space. Yes, man, as a part of our cultural reference point in Jamaica, you can't make the penny have so much space. You want the penny them live like white people? And I've heard parents with these things. Clubs provided the best opportunities for students to experience intellectual development outside of academic rigors, and hence relationships with clubs needs to be strengthened. Number 3, first set of training for teachers. Currently, punishment is too centered and punitive, almost revenge-seeking frames. Character education does not thrive in such aggressive environments. Restorative punishment has to be taught to teachers. Teachers should be the first implementation target for punishment education. Yes, for those who don't know, I was trained at Sam Sharp Teachers College. I taught secondary school. And I guarantee you, my students still remember me for this. I tell them my job here is to make you better. It's not to punish you. And we're going to work together to make you better. And we had a whole variety of ideas just focused on making students better. To the extent where, and I won't tell you which school, I ended up with a boy who was taking cocaine in my class, and nobody told me. They knew the boy was dabbling, and nobody said anything to me. They just say, yeah, man, give a little marker, man. Make him take him, man, because him look like him come here to solve all the problems. And that boy today, yes, is a minister of religion. And listen to this, he's also an auditor. Yeah. I am the chairman of Children First, and I am adamant, not preoccupied, I am adamant that every child can have a chance at becoming a productive human being. The traditional schools were the most criticized here. In protecting the image of their schools, they were described by students and staff as being the most punitive and unforgiving. A lot of work needs to be done. Addressing ACEs in school. Character education must be trauma-centered for the most underserved schools. ACEs are differentially distributed by school types, with the children of Tier 4 and Tier 3 schools in deep crisis. The most basic requirement is to ensure that they have a team of guidance counselors and social workers with an attached support system under government welfare or safety net. We have work to do. 5, adopt a draft balance or equity system to reduce the educational parity that is obvious. Most governments apply either a flat rate per student or quietly support the elite schools. And this is not a Jamaican problem, it's a problem right across. I've done a lot of work in Belize and Trinidad and Barbados, El Salvador, Guatemala, all over the place, 17 countries. And I guarantee you, this is a problem that we have to work on. We have to get to a point where the poorest schools get more resources. Inequality is core to social instability and violence. A draft system, meaning, I don't know if you've seen draft in basketball. The team that came last is the first team that gets a chance to select the best players. The poorest team gets the first pick. The benefit of this equity approach is that no team is left so far behind that the league lacks competition. And that's something we want to address. Attendance crisis must be addressed in order for character education to be effective. You can't have 43% of Tier 4 students attending school irregularly, and then you're going to have character education. You can't have character education when the boys out there running up and down on the streets. And therefore, the schools have to become the center of therapy, the center of change. The Ministry of Education must drive the change in Jamaica. 7, gender inequality must be addressed. I do not care how many of extremist feminists are going to describe me as misogynist, as whatever they want. I guarantee you Jamaica is not going to move forward with the way we treat boys. Jamaica is the only country on earth where more boys die yearly than girls and women combined. There is no other country. I'm a violence expert. I have access to all databases you can think of. There is no other country in the world where 9% of everybody who die every year is a boy, compared to 8.6% for women and girls combined. This did not happen suddenly. It is the result of centuries of targeting males for labor combined with decades of international development partners, IDP, pushing all their monies from the UN women to girls, forgetting that boys exist and that boys were the ones targeted by the planters, which is why we have 15 all-girls schools and 7 all-boys schools. And by the way, it was worse. There's an all-girls school that became a co-ed, and there are other schools that were actually converted. So there was a deliberate ploy to have no quality school or no school for boys because they needed to stay on the plantation. And then we came on top of that with UN Women money and everything shoved towards one direction. That is why we have the crisis we have today. This crisis was constructed. Let's go. When compared to the study, inner city girls were clearly better than boys. The inner city boys receive more of everything bad and dehumanizing. How is character education possible for inner city boys, right? That are the ones we need to transform the most when they must rely on criminals for attachment needs, for food, and they must be out on the streets earning food for their mothers and their sisters. How are we going to change the system? How is character education going to become better? Sometime next year, I'm going to be looking at the lives of 10 boys that 20 years ago I looked at. I can tell you from now. So in 1996, my master's paper called Hustling and Juggling, the Art of Survival for the Urban Poor, 1996. So let's go, 1996 to 2006, that's 10 years. To 2016, that's 20 years. In 2017, I went back to look for these boys. Out of these 10 boys, 6 were dead. And I have received news during COVID here that 1 more of them was shot. 7 out of the 10 are dead. What kind of ontological security is that? So when a boy pulls a gun on you, how do you negotiate life if he does not consider that he himself is living? The 10 females in the study have gone back. 1 is dead. She died from HIV complications. These were 10 of the poorest boys and the poorest girls. 7 to 1 dead. Let's go. The inequality at the other end must also be addressed. The current character education emphasis for girls is obnoxiously patriarchal. Teachers and parents openly stated that character education must prepare girls to become good wives. That's so nauseating. We must literally produce human beings out of girls, not wives. A structured program should treat girls as human beings, not as an attachment to another person. I mean, I'm happy I have a good wife. God bless whoever helped her mother and her school. But that should not be the essence of a program. But teachers told me so. And parents told me so. And told my team so. And 5% of the data set, 5% of the parents in the data set in the university study we are working on now told me that the student, their daughters must go to UE and UTech and Ezra to find a man. So despite the amelioration of girls, we still haven't got it right that girls are not property of somebody else. It should allow girls to enter relationships as partners, not as dependents, not as subordinates. This means exposing girls, including those of the well-funded all-girls schools, to principles of resilience and autonomy and leadership. Let's go. It must also be borne in mind that this cannot be a zero-sum game. You can't take from one to feed the other. We need to begin to work with boys and girls as if they are simply human beings. And finally, we need to establish a system to apply multiple-based monitoring and evaluation to facilitate sustainable tracking of the impact of all the programs we have. Thank you very much for listening, and let me stop sharing and open so we can have a quick discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gale. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Davian Leslie. Let me thank Mrs. Solomon, from whom you would have been hearing and who would have been shepherding the program thus far. I was lucky enough to join the presentation while Dr. Gale was presenting. And as usual, and as I anticipated, Dr. Gale always comes with the data, and it challenges you at all times to challenge him on the data that he has, and it challenges your thinking, it challenges the conclusions that you perhaps have already reached. And he asks you to take a second look and to open your eyes and to reconsider. And so even before I take any question, I'm just going to, at this juncture, like I always do at the end of a presentation that Dr. Gale does, to just thank him on behalf of the Teaching Council and the Ministry of Education for sharing the data and presenting it to us in such a conversational way, in such a way that we are able to absorb and appreciate it. I am going to allow those who have questions or comments or concerns to raise your hand at this point. Pat, I see your hand. I don't know if it's a legacy hand, but I'm going to take that hand in a second. Pat, if you're hearing me and that hand has been up long before and the issue was addressed, you can lower the hand now, otherwise I'll take it in a minute. But if you have questions, teachers, I'm just going to allow you to raise your hand now, and I will take those questions in a minute. If you want to put the question in the chat as well, then we can perhaps also go there. But let me start with the 3 hands that I see raised. There's one more presentation we have to do after this as well. So I'm going to invite you to stick and stay even after the brief discussion that we will have now. Pat, go ahead. Good afternoon. Pat Headley.
Okay, good afternoon. It took me a while to be able to unmute. Sorry about that.
We're hearing you. Go ahead.
Okay, so I was adding a suggestion to 8 that Dr. Gale gave. It's a simple suggestion, but I still want to give it because I am concerned about it. Whenever I enter a government or government agency or ministry, I would love to see it. It's a suggestion that has to do with encouraging our people to love Jamaica. I go to some of our government agencies and I'm waiting and the TV is on or whatever device it is that we can watch. I normally see foreign shows and movies. I would suggest that once a government building that something like JIS should be on or something to explain, even for example, when you go, if you go to an organization that is giving birth certificates and so on. I think something that advertises what they do and how they have helped people or something to do with the organization should be going on so we can be learning at the same time. You know, we go to a health center, I think we should have some of those nice programs that I see now going on where I don't remember the name of it, but it's very good where they talk about marriage, family life, and
Right.
so on.
I think we get the gist of the suggestion.
Yes.
The digital suggestion. But thank you. I don't know if Dr. Gale wants to respond to that or if that's something that we perhaps want to just...
It's absolutely fabulous, and it's something that has bothered me for a very long time. You know, I go to other countries, and when you go to a government building, they're telling you what they're doing and how good their country is, and you're sold. When you go into some government buildings here, they're showing cushy. I actually went to a building and saw 2 Indians staring at each other in a show called Cushy, and I was like, "What is this?" And people were telling me, "You don't know Cushy?" Like, I would rather see Usain Bolt running though. So yes.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Pat, for that suggestion. Let me jump down to Mugabe. Mugabe, go ahead.
Yes, good evening, everyone. My response to the presentation is that having left teaching to join law enforcement, particularly MOC and working out of Western Jamaica undercover for some time, it expressed in a very profound way Dr. Herbert Gale's presentation painted that vivid picture that we encountered. And now, since my return to the classroom, I continue to urge my female colleagues that you have to treat with boys differently. They look to the females for this cushion. It's an emotional cushion, it's a psychological cushion, but when they are rebuffed by this hardened approach to punitive, you know, this punitive approach to discipline. In a meeting earlier with my school, a coalition was literally called for looking at punitive strategies, and I'm trying to fight a dominant female group. And I'm not a feminist or anything like that. But what I'm saying is that we need to step back and look at how marginalized our young men are feeling and the expressions that is sentimented around them. And they are in a doldrum state right now. At some point, Barry Salmon's song will resonate. They are going to lift their head above the water and save themselves from drown. And that is why they will act out with these acts of violence. They become violent producers. And we just keep knocking them. The whole ambit of restorative justice. Allow them to speak, to express what they're facing. Ask them the why. Do you think you could have done it any way different? How do you feel about it? Let that resonate and you'll see this natural aura of change. They can become agent of change, but it must be consistent and it must be practicable and it must be real. And as Dr. Herbert Gale said, resort. It is not a cheap undertaking. And if we intend on just moving away from just the mere marks attained in school to give the person the passing grade, the flag of success, without that stabilizing ingredient of them being socially, retaught, socially embraced and fashioned for a changing world, we are going to continue to have these boys acting out and becoming violence producers and also using the school space as a recruitment den for criminal gangs.
Well said.
Thank you, Mugabe. All right, thank you, Mugabe. Let me jump down to Carleen. Hi, Carleen, how are you? Carleen, go ahead. That's Carleen Binns. Not hearing you, Carleen. Okay, are you there? Let's try again, Carleen.
Are you hearing me now? Good afternoon.
Hi, Carleen, we're hearing you. Go ahead.
All right, great. Profound, and I'm telling you, sometimes I tell people about theory and experience, but what he has combined in his presentation is theory, experience, and research. He is so accurate. I thank you for this presentation. I'm going to tell you why. I saw a little boy in my class. He's always beating the girls, beating them. I mean, good beating, you know. And when I called to him, I speak to him, I tried different strategies. And you know what his mother told me? That's why she divorced the father. The constant beating, he was beating her. When I spoke to the little boy, he said, woman, forget beaten. So what as you say, we not only talk, government have to put things in place. We, the private citizens, we teachers can do but so much. But we need some investment, some programs and things to go on. Not only talk, as you say, but get them in place. Thank you. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Carleen.
That boy sadly has a cultural reference point of domestic violence, and somebody has to sit him down and begin the reconstruction. It's going to be a lot of work.
Indeed. Thank you, Prof. Gale. Joan, I'm going to take another question or two. I see Joan is there. I see you is there, Sophia, and is that Omar? Let's go in that order. Joan, go ahead quickly.
Good afternoon. I have a concern. Because for children with that are slow learners. And what I found out when teaching them, that there are children who have real problems, right? And our school, primary school, are not set up to deal with those issues, because we are to deal with the curriculum and to go forward. And when we can catch some of the middle students, it is very hard to catch those ones that are really tedious. So I suggest that, and I recommend that there is a classroom for special needs, because if you even suggest that they go to MICO, by the time MICO tests them, we are told they are too old for MICO. And I believe, because I teach in an inner city school, I believe that when the children see that there is a room for children who are not progressing, they will put in more effort not to go into that special needs class. And that is why we have so many children going through the system. I used to teach A step. And they take out A step and then the grade 9. And I'm telling you, I'm happy that they're not at my school anymore, but I'm really sad because the last set of 90 students that we got were so bad. And now we don't have that grade 9, 7, 8, 9 with those slow kids that were coming in. Where are they? Where will they end up? So I suggest, because it's grieved me, to really grieve my heart, to see that the children are sifting through the system. We try to keep them back and we have them in grade 4, and then we hear that, oh, they must do the exam, and so we have to jump them to grade 6.
All right, you have raised a number of issues, many of which are fairly structural, and lots of changes we have to make in the system. But here's what I'm going to do, colleagues, in the interest of time, and also just to ensure that we make the best use of Dr. Gale. I'm going to lower all the hands that are now raised. And if you have not a comment, but a question that you're seeking, perhaps some clarification, a little guidance, making a comment, you want to ask Professor Gale, Dr. Gale, a question that you're seeking a direct response from him on, then you can raise your hand. I see 2 hands have gone back up. Belinda, I'll start with you and then go down to you. Go ahead, Belinda.
Yes, sir. Question. What do I do? What I go back to school with in September to help my kids? Because yes, I have kids like that. What do I go back with? Because money and all of those things are going to take long for authority to change things. What do I do as a teacher?
All right. I know I see Mrs. Solomon's hand went up, but I'm going to allow Dr. Gale, and then I'll jump down to Alison, because I imagine Mrs. Solomon wants to take a bite at this as well. Go ahead, Dr. Gale.
All right. So one of the things, I've been with Children First now for 20 odd years. And one of the things I've made sure that all the children we work with, and we work with Children First is the largest child advocacy in the region, is to make sure they understand that this is not a project, this is a program. I will be with you until I die. That's a pledge I have made to these young people. And Claudette Pius, even if she gets sick, even if she's healthy, whatever, we make a pledge to these kids, right? So that's one of the first things, that the kids, no matter what mental state they're in, need an assurance that they have somebody they can lean on. In the ACE's presentation earlier, you heard that children need at least one stable and consistent human being in their lives. And that's you, teacher, that's you. Right? A lot of the kids, you saw the comparison with the parents. The parents are way behind you in terms of being stable and consistent. So unfortunately, it's you. So if you have a child that needs to be diagnosed, I don't know the channels that you have. If you have a guidance counselor, what I normally do when I was teaching at that level is I made sure that my guidance counselor have these people, and I stay in her ears until these kids are diagnosed, right? And then I've had concerts in schools, to get the funding to help children. Concerts, we put on all sort of stuff, but I guarantee you, a lot of the kids you have need is not anything complicated they need in terms of change therapy, right? And one of the things you can do is also call the psychology and psychiatry units at the UII and seek help for your children. They exist, they're here. Most of them will tell you no, but I'm certain you'll find one stupid like myself who will help. All right. So expand the resources upon which you draw. Right, the ministry, I can't speak for the Ministry of Education, I don't work there, but it is very clear that this group listens a little bit more than the others that I have met, and I've been around for a while. So help will come, but in the meantime, try and see what you can do to help at least the worst ones. Okay?
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Gale. Just wanted to remind you, teachers, we have a third presentation, and that's from Mrs. Haynes Davidson from the Guidance and Counseling Ministry. So she's going to expand a little on what Dr. Gale is offering support for teachers. I can't say it any better than Dr. Gale, but one sentence: relationships are the intervention.
Yes.
Great disciple, what experiences are you going to give the students? That's key. The relationships you build, relationships are the intervention.
Be
Also,
stable and consistent.
Yes. Right. I also, Mr. Leslie, want to give a shout out to those in the YouTube space. Aldis Douglas says, I truly loved and appreciated this presentation. There are so many takeaways. I intend to implement and apply all the recommendations. Awesome, Aldis. Donna Chambers says, character education should be embedded into the curriculum. What a thing. Simone Foster, are you hearing that? Kenneth Himes Davis, are you hearing that? More to come, Donna. Audrey Hamilton is asking, how can we focus on Maslow needs when we're evaluating based on outcome of the curriculum interaction? But Audrey, the two presentations thus far said how the experience of the children affect their outcomes. So we have to give them a positive experience. All right. Just wanted to put that in there. Just remind you that we have a third presenter, Mr. Leslie. So I know we can't take all the questions.
Yes, indeed. And I'm gonna have to exercise the power of the chair, or the power that I've been given as moderator and make an executive call. And so I'm going to take one more question, and I'm so sorry, Omar, Lucretia, and all the others whose hands are up and have gone up since some of the other questions were asked. But we really do have to run. I'm going to allow you to go ahead now. You, Duffus, go ahead, you.
Yes, good afternoon. Now, I'm not sure if my point is a question or a wish, but I fully support the idea of character education in schools. But a question I am concerned with is if character education is to be implemented in our schools, let's say as a part of the curriculum, would there be a plan for this to be introduced at like the teacher training institutions with specific modules that cover these character education areas that we want to concern? And I'm just thinking that, I was just thinking that all hands on deck with this situation would be good starting, but okay, the answer is yes.
Training and cultural reference point. Those are the two key things in effecting change. If people don't have a cultural reference point, they don't know what they're doing. But we can also achieve a cultural reference point among teachers by training them in the teachers' colleges. And that's why we are engaging the teachers' colleges.
Yes, thank you. Fully understand.
Thank you. Dr. Gale with a school culture. Omar has managed to slip his question into the chat. Smart of you, Omar. Smart of you. Dr. Gale with a school, I'm reading it now out loud. Dr. Gale with a school culture that focuses on performance, or can we implement with great buy-in a school-wide approach for trauma-informed care? You want to give a quick response to that, Dr. Gale?
Quickly, if you want performance, you're going to need to get, I believe, we have to get to a point where we begin to look at schools based on what they get and what they produce from the point of what they got. And if we begin to do that, I've seen this in Europe, there's an assessment on the children at the beginning, a diagnostic, and then there's a second diagnostic, and the school is rewarded for the gaps. So therefore, the schools with the students who are coming from troubled backgrounds get more resources, and those schools are assessed two ways. They're assessed broadly like Educate Jamaica, but they're also assessed based on what change they've effected. And once you do that, then schools are going to sit down and say, what do I do to effect change? Oh, they need food. Oh, they need these things. We need to go to the intelligence, whatever, and so forth. And therefore performance will be taken as more holistically.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Gale. Mr. Solomon, your hand is up. Is it that you meant to comment on something else, or is that a legacy hand?
No, old hand, sorry.
All right, no problem. So Dr. Gale, again, on behalf of the Ministry of Education, the Jamaica Teaching Council, and all the teachers gathered in this room here, and all the teachers with whom you have interacted over the summer here in particular, let me just thank you for all the work you continue to do for education. You're a friend of education, much more than those whom you lecture at the university, but you are an advocate for teachers, for boys, for young men, and for quality education. And I don't think it is said, I don't think it can be said too much, but anytime you present, we enjoy. Your mic is open. Let me mute you. There you go. Anytime you present, we enjoy the engagement. It is as educational as it is entertaining. And we just thank you for the way in which you serve education. We will have one more presentation if you wish to stay around.
Mr. Leslie, remember the giveaway.
Yes, we will give you we will give the teachers a giveaway at the end. So we're not giving away just yet. So once Mrs. Kennedy Ains Davis, who is the next presenter, Kennedy is actually Senior Guidance Officer in the Ministry of Education, Region 3. She's going to be helping us understand some of the questions that I know perhaps others have asked with respect to the way in which this will be rolled out. So let me make way now for Mrs. Ains Davis, who you see masquerading as Simone Foster. Don't just ignore me. That is actually Kennedy Ains Davis, and she's going to be talking with us for a few minutes now. Go ahead, Mrs. Ains Davis.
All right, bye everyone.
Before you come on, Mrs. Ains Davis, did you have any final words, Dr. Gale, before you?
No, just saying bye. I have a 5 o'clock, so I have to go.
Indeed.
All right, take care, everybody.
Yes, thank you for being here, sir. All the best. All right, go ahead, Mrs. Ains Davis.
Mrs. Alison Solomon and Mr. Leslie, our leaders, our facilitators. Ladies and gentlemen, a very pleasant afternoon to you. I know you all have come on, most of you that is, since 2 o'clock, and you have been having just a feast. And so my job is just to bring us somewhat a little wine because of some of your questions earlier, and to ensure you get the giveaway that Mr. Leslie has for you. We are looking at ACEs, how they affect children. We see the international study, which started as way back as in 1995, 1997. We see so much on the internet as it relates to adverse childhood experiences. We tell you what the children might go through, how they might display this hurt and trauma. But we also are aware that for some of us as adults, we ourselves have been exposed to some level of childhood experiences, some traumatic events. The Ministry of Education wants you to know this evening that we have been looking at how do we help you as you continue to help our children. When I looked earlier at the chat and I saw the comments, teachers again, teachers to the rescue, teachers saving children, teachers taking from their pockets to give to children, then we also have to look at who therefore supports the teacher in a manner that the teacher can now appreciate all this information you are exposed to this evening and to now help the children. We want to remind you that the new standards curriculum is asking schools to ensure that the CITs are in place, the curriculum teams are in place. We're looking at the expansion of the SWPBIS. It was so wonderful to hear Dr. Honigman speak to SWPBIS because we have that. We are now rolling it in a more structured, in a more organized way. And again, of course, we're being supported by UNICEF. We're now what we never had before in years. We have educational social workers being assigned to schools. So each educational social worker has a group of schools that he or she is working with. The framework is there. We have looked at the studies. We have looked at what schools have been saying. We have looked at the needs assessment. We have looked at the school improvement plans. We have seen where you have been saying, we are willing, because for you to be a teacher, this is from your heart, because the constant cry is more money, because we have all these needs, but you still decide to stay, to stick with it, and to help a child. So teaching is really from the heart. And so the ministry is committed to ensuring that these initiatives that are being rolled out have a space in every one of them to support your teachers. We look at the integrated services delivery that will be rolling out in September, that when your school teams meet, and here it is that you have some of your children who are way beyond the scope of all the professionals in your school, who are way beyond you trying to help a particular way, but they must get the external services. They need the additional psychology, or the psychologist, or the social worker, or a psychiatrist. The integrated services delivery, which operates at tiers 1, 2, and 3 for SWPBIS, will provide that level of support. It's been structured. It's going to be rolled out in a way so your school teams, we're not labeling children, but we are appreciating what these childhood experiences, these adverse childhood experiences can cause. There are long-term effects. They don't happen, they're not random in nature. And so as your heart goes out to these children, the Ministry of Education here, we are saying, teachers, we're moving forward together. We have put things in place to help these children so that you can carry on with the business of teaching and learning. We're well aware that for many of you, you might never have been trained as a social worker or a guidance counselor, but you spend that time to listen, to focus on the effective, because when your children hurt, you hurt. And so we're looking at the strengthening of the health and family life education in our schools, because this is a preventive arm that helps the children to develop these resilience skills, the coping mechanism, the coping skills, the life skills in general. And so this little session here is just to remind you that we're moving forward in a more deliberate, in a more organized, in a more structured way. I'm very sure that there are those of you on this platform who participated in the Return to Happiness therapy and the training. And I know that I am very confident that more teachers will be exposed to this. When we worked with some of you, it was the Return to Happiness sessions that allowed you to recover somewhat. What are we saying from the ministry? From the Guidance and Counseling Unit, HFLE, Safety and Security. The Safety and Security policy is being developed. It's far advanced. We're saying to you, while we can't fix everything and we will never have the ideal, it does not prevent us from striving for that. Your presence here this evening says to us at the ministry, look, we understand all the challenges, but we are sticking with this. We are sticking with serving our country in this regard. We're sticking with wanting to make a difference. And so the information you were exposed to this evening, I see you saying, wow, thank you for this information. Oh my, I could listen to this all day. And that tells me that from the heart, you have been teaching. So again, before you go, remember the curriculum implementation teams in schools. This is a very critical area to ensure that the curriculum is carried out the way it was intended to. And the curriculum for us at the ministry is not just the teaching of formula, or it's just science, or it's just social studies. It is catering to the entire child. It's a holistic approach, teachers. And so those children who will need wraparound services, the members of the Guidance and Counseling Unit and other units in the ministry, the inclusion, the special ed needs, the students with special needs who are being catered to and catered for. It's a paradigm shift in a sense, saying to you, we're taking all of this into consideration. The fact that NCEL now has a program that you can be engaged in that looks at gender violence, that looks at SWPBIs, that looks at a safe and secure environment. Because truth is, if our children are safe, you're better able to get the academics going. And that is what we want to be doing for you. And so this evening, we thank you that you spent the time to walk through with us as we looked at the ACs, as we looked at the diagnostic study, as we looked at the need for character education in a very structured and formal way, because like many of you have been tweaking and typing and putting in the chat, we all have aspects of these in our system, but now it's been formalized. And again, we do thank JTC for hosting the way they normally do. And we look forward to them rolling out other initiatives that will empower you teachers, that will improve you as a person, because we are also aware that the effects of the pandemic were not just on students, were not just on other people, but you are family members too. You lead families and you endured as well. And so we have taken that step that we also have to provide that support for you. So yes, in some instances where you reflect on your own life, if the challenges are there, come to us, let us know. Let us help you as you put your best teaching foot forward, as you give service to our nation, because at the end of the day, the decisions we take today will affect our nation for years to come. Teachers, we're here to support you. And as we roll out these initiatives, many of you will be pulled into training as we look at mental health literacy in our adolescents, because sometimes those are the factors that cause them to display the behaviors that interrupt your classes. And so we're looking forward as together we make the change, we make a difference. Thank you so very much. Mr. Leslie.
Thank you very much. And I apologize to you, Mrs. Ains Davidson, and teachers on a matter of correction. Kennedy Ains Davidson, not Davis, as I kept saying, is the correct name for this lovely lady. Would have just shared with you some of the structural changes that we are hoping you are better able to appreciate, and that we will be using to guide implementation of various initiatives come September 1. Well, it's really September 5th, but we say September 1 informally, meaning the start of the new school year. And so teachers, I'm going to, in a minute, allow you to raise your hand for questions, comments, or any other little final evaluative statements you may wish to make. But before I do that, I'm going to turn off the chat. I'm going to start by turning off the chat because I'm going to ask a question, but the question has to come over the mic. I'm sorry, because it just seemed too hard to keep track of who put it first in the chat and so on. So I'm going to ask you to get ready because I'm going to post a question. I'm going to ask a question here, and you raise your hand. First hand that goes up, I will call on, and you get a chance to answer. The question comes from the category of the Sons at School Challenge quiz. Actually, let me just get right into the question. Name the 4 blocks of character education. Okay, Amoy levers. That's the rule. Once you put up your hand, I stop asking the question. Amoy?
Good afternoon. So
Go
the
ahead.
4 blocks are moral, civic pride, intellectual, and performance.
So finish the question for me, please. Amoy, finish the question.
Oh, the four emphasis on character education.
Okay. All right. So name the 4 blocks of character education according to the Jubilee Center for Character and Virtue. Indeed. And give them again for me, please, Amoy.
Moral, civic pride, or intellectual or intelligence, and performance.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Amoy. We will be reaching out to you in the chat in a second to get your contact information and so on, so you can pick up your ticket for 2. Those are airline tickets that take you to Orlando, Florida, where you get to stay at Disney World for a few days, okay?
Okay.
Yes, my dear. All right, so thank you very much for paying such keen attention, Amoy, and all the teachers who paid attention and who would have been able to answer the question but didn't get the chance because Amoy jumped on it so fast. So thank you very much, Amoy, for responding, and teachers for participating and just sticking and staying. Are there any questions, comments, concerns with respect to what Mrs. Ains Davidson would have just shared with you? If you have questions or comments on that, you can put those in the chat or you can raise your hand. Otherwise, we are just going to thank you for being here. We have been placing in the chat the link that you can use to access the exit ticket for this session. It is in the chat at this point, and I think the chat has been disabled. So if you go there now, you definitely will see it. If you go there now, you definitely will see it. If you go there now, let me just put it there again in case somebody has just come in after that was actually shared in the chat. And Mrs. Solomon, in all of her wisdom, is also sharing a screen that you can see. You can just go ahead and screenshot. You can click on the link, but go ahead and screenshot so that you have it for posterity, because sometimes it might not work the minute you are trying to get in, and as a result, you might not have written it down or so. So just make sure you have a record of the link as well. I see there's a hand that is up. That's J. Anderson Long. Go ahead, J. Anderson Long. I hope I'm saying that right.
Good afternoon. It's actually Leon, sir.
Leon, I was wondering. Go ahead, Miss Leon.
Yes, I put it in the chat, but obviously it was not seen and the chat has been disabled. I was actually inquiring about the RT8 certification from last year. The return to happiness, Mrs. Davids.
All right, before we get into those questions, I was trying to get persons to speak about the substantive issue of the webinar and not the
I thought you were asking about something that the last presenter spoke about.
Substantive issues about the webinar, something that she said that you wanted to clarify on the technical side, not the administrative side.
Okay, sir.
But we have noted your question nonetheless, and we will reach out to you. Okay, Ms. Leon?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I know that one was an excellent program. It was very good. And I really do think that more teachers should be exposed to it.
Okay. You have been telling your friends about it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I've been promoting it and using it to assist me in my classes as it relates to HFLE, because that's the subject that I facilitate.
Okay. All right, no problem. Thank you very much, Ms. Leong, for your affirmation and just validating the experience. Yes, Mrs. Solomon?
We have two more.
Well, hardly hearing you.
We have two more gifts. Are you hearing me?
I'm sorry, say again?
We have two more giveaways.
Oh, we have two more giveaways.
Two more giveaways, yes.
Oh, Lord, have mercy. I didn't realize.
I'm going to ask you to sort out the responses from the participants. I'll give the question. I'm asking the participants to name 3 ministry initiatives that spoke about.
Yeah, we're hardly hearing you, but I just go again with that, Mrs. Solomon. I'm sorry.
Name 3 ministry initiatives that Mrs. spoke about.
Okay. 3 ministry initiatives that Mrs. A. Davidson spoke about. Let me ask Mrs. Ains Davidson to be on standby to help adjudicate and the accuracy and completeness of those initiatives as are about to be shared with us. And we're looking for 2 winners here, by the way. So let me start with Kenisha Walker. Go ahead, Kenisha. Kenisha Walker.
I am asking about I see on the screen, registers teachers. So I have a question.
All right, we'll come back to you in a minute, Kenisha. So let me lower the hands. We're taking now, I'm lowering the hands. We're taking now persons who are responding to the question for the giveaway. 3 ministry initiatives that Mrs. A. Davidson spoke about. Omar, go ahead.
She spoke about the return to happiness, the Suitcase program, and so the return to happiness, Suitcase, and support for teachers as well. They could call the ministry as well for support.
Okay, I think that third one.
I like that.
The third one is a freebie. We're giving you that third one, Omar. We're giving you that third one. That's a freebie. Yes, but indeed, That's an A+ response. Thank you, Omar. Anybody else wants to take a crack at it? Are there 3 other initiatives? If you can add one more initiative to those 3, you know, then the other prize for somebody who wants it can jump on it. One more initiative to those 3. Miss Leong, you want to take a shot at it?
Yes, sir. I just add one more to it.
Give me 2 more actually. Let's keep her standard.
I heard one. So I just,
oh, sorry, I misspoke.
Oh Lord.
I misspoke.
The Health and Family Life Education Program.
But true, Miss Leong. You're doing well. You're doing well.
He already spoke about the one that they returned to happiness and the 3 Bs.
Maybe you can help by telling us what SWEBIS is, if it's even just what the abbreviation means.
So I don't remember.
That. But no, Mrs. Leong, come now, man. come now, man. Come now, man.
I don't remember, to be honest.
You don't remember. You don't remember. Okay.
No.
All right. Ava, how are you? Look at Ava, my friend. Ava? Is that Ava? It looks like
yes. Okay, I couldn't unmute. So she talk about the HFLE, she talk about the CIT. I think that's the one nobody mentioned.
Right.
Yes, the calling on the ministry. She talk about the SWPBs.
Mm-hmm.
How much are gone? How much?
Well, you certainly have added one more to all the others that the previous teacher said. So we will reach out to you in the chat, Ava, and I'm also going to ask for a special adjudication to be made between Ava and Miss Leong with respect to this final prize, because we only have 2. So just to be clear, Omar, and we will have to make a determination if it's between Miss Lawrence and or Miss Leong with respect to how we give away that final prize. Mrs. Ains Davidson, you had a comment?
Yes, sir. In the spirit of true school-wide positive behavior interventions and support, we will award Ava and Miss Leon, but there was another hand up, Kadeen, and we with Miss Foster, we think you should take that person as well. Let's hear what that person has to say. We will, of course, consider that person for recognition in the true spirit of SWPBIS.
Okay, all right. Mrs. Ains Davidson just gave you the abbreviation. I mean, the meaning for the abbreviation SWPBIS teachers. She just said it. Let's see, somebody put it in the chat. Maybe somebody can just put in the chat a reminder of what Mrs. Ains Davidson just said. In the true spirit of, and she gave you that abbreviation just now. Kadeen, go ahead. Kadeen, go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. She also mentioned the NSTEL initiative for teachers, along with the others that were mentioned. So I just wanted to add that to the list.
Okay. All right, no problem. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Kadeen, I trust you are doing well. And Mrs. Solomon has put in the chat the meaning of SWPBIS, what I hear being called SWEBIS. This is fine. And so the abbreviation is buried in the chat if you haven't seen it. Let me just go there and promote it to the mic if you're not able to see the chat. School-wide positive behavior. It's not initiative, I'm sure. Interventions and support. School-wide positive behavior interventions and support. That being the abbreviation that you're all asking about. All right, so I know a few persons have been asking about registration. There is an expectation that all teachers in Jamaica are to be registered teacher as per the education regulations. The Teaching Council has been managing a registration program for a while now, and we have been working very hard to ensure that you register as a teacher. We have developed the policy, we have adopted the policy that all teachers can benefit from any training activity we do, but you won't be able to benefit from a certificate until you are registered. So I know a number of teachers are still not registered. You can go to our JTC website and start the registration process or check your registration process. The form that we're inviting you to complete now does ask you for your registration number, but you can go ahead and complete the form without your registration number. That field in the form is not mandatory. So you can submit the form without giving us your registration number in case you don't know what it is or in case you do not have one as yet. But if you have one and you know what it is, we invite you to give us that number. Go ahead and complete the form, even if you do not have a registration number as yet, but we do encourage you to make an effort to get registered as soon as possible. We thank you, Ms. Leong, for sharing your contact information. Let me also ask Kadeen, and I know Kadeen's number already, but Kadeen, please put in the chat as well your contact information, and Ava, put in the chat as well your contact information. Just send it in a private message for me, please, so that we are able to reach out to you. So we do invite you to go to our JTC page and check your registration status, and to begin your registration if you aren't as yet registered. We are aware that we have some outstanding certificates for some teachers. Some teachers might have been registered since they completed the training and you haven't gotten your certificate. And so we're working on those. We promise to have those in your inbox. The commitment we are giving, that we have given ourselves and that we're sharing with you, is that you give us the first 2 weeks in September to resolve all of those outstanding certificate issues so that we can be in touch, so that we can share those with you within the first 2 weeks in September. So if you're a registered teacher and you have met the certification requirement for whatever course or whatever program or whatever webinar that you have done, then we assure you that your certificate would be available in the second week by the second week in September. I see a few hands are still up. I know Ava's hand was up as a result of answering question. Let me lower that. I'm just going to very quickly take Natalie's hand and then Kenisha, and then that's it. We definitely would have to go. Natalie?
Good evening, everyone. Sir, I was registered with JTC from 2015, and up till now, I have not gotten my certificate. Then when I input my TRN on this system, it's telling me that it's not going through. So I actually re-registered again, and now I'm asked to upload documents for the same process that I did over 6 years ago.
Right. So I'm not sure. I don't know the specifics of your case, Natalie, but I'm trusting that you are being guided by a registration officer, or that you're interacting with the system and the system is walking you through what you need to do. I won't be able to address your specific issue here because, of course, as you'd imagine, I have no idea what might be causing your problem. I don't know, though, a lot of teachers sometimes believe that they were registered 6 years ago or 10 years ago or 8 years ago. They remember somebody came to their school.
You did it? No, I did it. No, not at school. I did it. I took it into the region's office. Everything was documented and everything. I have.
What I'm saying is that sometimes what our memories are of what happened and what's happening now might be at odds. I'm not saying that's happening in your case. But if you are not registered as per the system, then it's quite likely that what you believed happened 6 years ago did not in fact happen. And so I'm going to encourage you again, please, just go through the process and go ahead and register. And this is it for real, so to speak. All right.
Okay. Mr. Leslie, can I
Yes.
just remind the teachers that we are streaming live on YouTube via the webinar, and therefore if they could keep the questions to the webinar questions.
Indeed. Absolutely. And that is absolutely crucial. Teachers, we have audience beyond that, which is in this room, and quite frankly, audience that will live on in posterity, because it's going to be a YouTube video. And so I'm going to take an executive decision, I'm so sorry, to perhaps bring this discussion to an end, unless the question you have is related to the substantive and technical issues discussed in the webinar. So I'm going to lower the hands, and if it is not a question about the webinar, about the issues that were raised, the teaching and learning related issues, the curriculum matters, then I'm going to invite you to lower the, well, to bring the hand back up, if that is what you want to ask about. Otherwise, we are going to wish you goodbye to our friends who joined us on YouTube. Let me thank you as well for joining us, and do have a safe and great rest of the summer, what little is left of it. Do get some rest, and we're looking forward to seeing you on the other side of the summer when we meet up as the new school year begins. Do have a great rest of the afternoon, teachers. Mrs. Solomon, any final goodbyes?
Oh, no, it's late in the evening. Teachers, stay safe. Thank you for joining us. It was a wonderful evening spending with you, and thank you. And have a great school year.
Indeed. Indeed, have a great school year. Don't know if Ms. Foster is still in this space. If you are, Ms. Foster, just giving a chance to say goodbye to the teachers. Mrs. Ains Davidson. All right.
Go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
Just giving a chance to say goodbye to the teachers, Mrs. Ains Davidson, to wish them
Thank
well.
you. Oh, thank you so very much, teachers. Be your best to you, and thank you for your service. Remember, 5 minutes a day just for you, nobody else. It makes a difference. God bless.
Indeed, thank you very much. Mrs. Foster, Ms. Foster, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much for staying the course with us, and we're happy we're able to share with you in this experience, and we are building capacity together. Thank you so much.
Great stuff. Teachers, do have a great rest of the summer. Looking forward to a great school year with you all. Take care. Bye-bye.